After the rich wife's funeral, the husband and his pregnant mistress could barely wait to claim the inheritance. But when they arrived at the insurance company, something happened that made their blood run cold. What was about to unfold in that room would change everything. Marlowe Thorne stared at his reflection in the bathroom mirror of Fairview Funeral Home, his knuckles white as they gripped the marble countertop. Outside, 200 of Austin's elite gathered to mourn his wife. He adjusted his black Armani tie with practiced precision, the motion as cold and calculated as the look in his steel-gray eyes. "For God's sake, pull yourself together," he whispered to his reflection. 2 more hours. The door creaked open behind him. Piper Voss slipped inside, quickly scanning the empty bathroom before turning the lock. Her fitted black dress did little to hide the slight curve of her stomach, evidence of their 4-month secret growing inside her. At 29, she was 9 years his junior, with auburn hair that cascaded past her shoulders, and green eyes now rimmed red from exhaustion rather than grief. "The Hampton board members keep watching you," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the muffled organ music seeping through the walls. "And Lawrence hasn't taken his eyes off you since the service started." Marlowe's jaw tightened. Of course he hasn't. His only daughter just went off a cliff in her Mercedes. He's looking for someone to blame. Do you think he suspects? How could he? It was an accident. The word hung between them, heavy with unspoken truth. 3 days earlier, Eileen Thorne's vehicle had veered off Highway 290 on her way to Fredericksburg, plunging 60 feet into a rocky ravine. Dead-on impact, according to the Travis County Medical Examiner. A tragic accident on a rain-slicked road. An accident that happened to align perfectly with a $5 million life insurance policy that Marlowe had convinced her to upgrade 8 months earlier. "Let's just get through today," Piper said, straightening his lapel with trembling fingers. "Then we wait for the insurance payout, and in a few months, after an appropriate period of mourning, we disappear," Marlowe finished, catching her hand and squeezing it once before dropping it. "San Francisco. New identities. Our child never grows up knowing their father was a widower who married into Texas pharmaceutical royalty." Piper's eyes darted to the door. "I should go out first. Someone might notice." As she reached for the lock, Marlowe grabbed her wrist. "Did you delete those calls from your phone? The ones to Eileen on Sunday?" "Of course I did. I'm not an amateur." She pulled away, adjusting her dress. "I'll see you out there, Mr. Thorne." Her voice shifted to a professional tone, in case anyone was listening outside. Alone again, Marlowe splashed cold water on his face. 10 years ago, he'd been a hungry young attorney fresh out of UT Law when he met Eileen Hampton at a charity gala. She'd been standing alone by a fountain, 31 and painfully shy despite her family's prominence, clutching a champagne flute she barely sipped from. While others saw a plain, awkward heiress, Marlowe saw opportunity. Their courtship had been swift and calculated. Theater tickets, weekend trips to coastal Galveston, carefully orchestrated moments designed to make her believe in a romance that existed only in her mind. Lawrence Hampton had seen through it immediately, but Eileen, desperate for independence from her controlling father, had defied him for the first time in her life. "She's a grown woman capable of making her own decisions," she'd told her father at the rehearsal dinner, while Marlowe pretended not to overhear from the adjacent room. "I know what I'm doing." But she hadn't. Not really. The bathroom door swung open, jolting Marlowe from his memories. Lawrence Hampton stood in the doorway, his 6'3" frame commanding the space. At 65, he remained imposing, silver hair perfectly coiffed, his black suit custom-tailored to his still athletic build, his steel blue eyes, so similar to his daughter's, fixed on Marlowe with laser focus. "The pastor is asking for the family," Lawrence said, his deep voice betraying no emotion. "It's time for the final viewing." "Of course." Marlowe straightened his shoulders. "I was just taking a moment." "Understandable." Lawrence's gaze drifted to the sink, then back to Marlowe's face. Grief manifests in unusual ways. Something in his tone made Marlowe's skin prickle. He followed his father-in-law down the dim hallway, past framed photographs of Eileen throughout the years, her graduation from Wharton, her appointment as Director of Public Relations at Hampton Pharmaceuticals, her wedding day. Marlowe paused at that one. Eileen beaming in her custom Vera Wang gown, while he stood beside her, smiling the practiced smile that had convinced half of Austin society they were madly in love. Lawrence noticed his hesitation. "She never stopped loving you, you know, even when—" He cut himself off, jaw tightening. Even when what? Marlowe asked, suddenly alert. Even when it became clear you didn't deserve it. Lawrence pushed open the double doors to the main chapel, ending the conversation. The service passed in a blur of hymns and eulogies. Marlowe delivered his with perfect emotional calibration, voice cracking at precisely the right moments, a single tear timed to fall as he described their last morning together. Across the room, Piper sat with the other employees from Thorne and Associates, her face a mask of professional sympathy. No one would suspect that just 12 hours before Eileen's fatal accident, Piper had been in Marlowe's bed in their downtown condo, a secret apartment he kept for their rendezvous, paid for through a shell company that even Eileen's private investigator hadn't discovered. Had she hired a private investigator? The thought struck Marlowe suddenly as he watched Lawrence accept condolences in the receiving line. Something about the old man's demeanor today felt dangerous, like he was surveying a battlefield rather than mourning his daughter. "Mr. Thorne?" A woman in her early 50s touched his elbow. "I'm Caroline Winters, Eileen's assistant at Hampton. I just wanted to say, she spoke so highly of you." Marlowe summoned his most grateful expression. "Thank you. That means a great deal. She was particularly touched by how you insisted on upgrading her life insurance policy last year." The woman's eyes were red-rimmed but focused. "She mentioned it was your idea, that you were always thinking about her future." A chill ran down Marlowe's spine. "Yes, well, in my line of work, you see the consequences of failing to prepare." He scanned the crowd for Piper, finding her engaged in conversation with one of the paralegals. "If you'll excuse me." As the reception wound down, Marlowe found himself cornered by Eileen's uncle, Thomas Hampton, Lawrence's younger brother and CFO of the family company. "Terrible business this," Thomas said, nursing a tumbler of bourbon from the open bar. "Highway patrol said there were no skid marks." Almost like she didn't try to stop. Marlowe's mouth went dry. The road was wet. Maybe she knew braking would only make it worse. Maybe. Thomas studied him over the rim of his glass. "Insurance investigation begins tomorrow, I hear. Standard procedure for claims of this size." "Of course," Marlowe said smoothly. "I wouldn't expect anything less." "No, I don't suppose you would." Thomas clapped him on the shoulder with unexpected force. "You're a planner, aren't you, Marlowe? Always thinking 3 steps ahead." 2 days after the funeral, Marlowe sat at his glass-topped desk at Thorne and Associates, reviewing the insurance paperwork spread before him. The Metro Life policy was straightforward. $5 million for accidental death, double indemnity for death by vehicular accident not caused by the insured, $10 million, tax-free. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Thorne, Piper's here with those contracts you requested." "Send her in." He closed the insurance folder as his office door opened. Piper entered, her professional facade impeccable in a charcoal pencil skirt and cream blouse. Only when the door clicked shut did her shoulders sag. "I can't keep doing this," she whispered, collapsing into the chair across from him. "The secretaries keep asking how I'm holding up, saying how brave I am to come to work when my boss's wife just died. I feel like I'm going to scream." "Lower your voice," Marlowe hissed, glancing at the door. "We're almost there. I've scheduled a meeting with the insurance adjuster for Friday. You want me to come with you? Won't that look suspicious? You're my legal assistant. It makes perfect sense for you to accompany me to handle documents." He leaned forward. "Besides, we need to present a united front. The Hamptons are circling." "What do you mean?" "Lawrence, Thomas, the whole board. They're watching me." Caroline Winters made a point of mentioning the insurance policy at the funeral. Piper's face drained of color. "Do you think they know about us?" "No," Marlowe said firmly, though uncertainty gnawed at him. "If they knew about us, they would have confronted me directly. Lawrence Hampton isn't known for his subtlety." She nodded, not entirely convinced. "Those phone calls to Eileen, what if they check her records? 3 calls from my assistant about urgent paperwork. That's hardly suspicious." What he didn't tell Piper was how those calls had served their purpose perfectly. After the 3rd one, Eileen had called Marlowe, irritated about being bothered on a Sunday. "Your assistant is relentless," she'd complained. "I'm trying to have a day to myself." "Where are you going?" he'd asked casually. "That new vineyard in Fredericksburg, the one we talked about visiting. In this weather, the roads will be treacherous." "I'll be careful," she'd said. "Don't wait up." Those were the last words she'd ever spoken to him. An hour later, at a particularly dangerous curve that Marlowe had researched extensively, her car went over the edge. They hadn't killed her. Not directly, they'd simply created an opportunity. The distinction felt important to Marlowe, though he suspected a jury would disagree. Piper stood, smoothing her skirt. "What time on Friday?" 2 o'clock, Metrolife's downtown office. He reached for her hand, his voice softening. "After this, we'll never have to hide again. I can be a real father to our child." Her eyes welled with tears. "Promise me we're going to get away with this." Before he could answer, his phone rang. The display showed Lawrence Hampton's private number. "You should go," he told Piper, withdrawing his hand. When she'd left, he answered on the 4th ring. "Lawrence? What can I do for you?" "I've been reviewing Eileen's personal effects," Lawrence said without preamble. "Some interesting items in her home office safe. I think we should discuss them before your meeting with Metrolife on Friday." Marlowe's blood turned to ice. "What items?" "Let's save that for our meeting." "Tomorrow noon, my office." The line went dead. That night, Marlowe paced his downtown condo, bourbon in hand, as Piper watched from the sofa. "What could he have found?" she asked for the 3rd time. "We were so careful." "I don't know," Marlowe admitted, draining his glass. "Maybe nothing. Maybe he's fishing. Should we run? Now before the meeting?" He shook his head. "That would be an admission of guilt. Besides, the money hasn't cleared. We need that insurance payout." "The money won't matter if we're in prison," Piper pointed out, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. Marlowe refilled his glass, staring out at the Austin skyline. If Lawrence had proof, he would have gone to the police already. This is a power play. "Then what's our move?" He turned to her, decision made. "I meet with him tomorrow. Alone. I find out what he knows, what he wants. Lawrence Hampton is a businessman. Everything has a price. And what if it's a price we can't pay?" Marlowe didn't answer. Instead, he pulled her to her feet and kissed her with desperate intensity. They made love with a frantic energy born of fear and uncertainty, both knowing that their carefully constructed plans were beginning to unravel. The next morning, Marlowe stood in the lobby of Hampton Pharmaceuticals' downtown headquarters, a 40-story glass monolith that dominated the Austin skyline. The receptionist, a young woman who'd attended his wedding 5 years earlier, couldn't quite meet his eyes as she directed him to the executive elevator. Lawrence was waiting in his corner office, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Lady Bird Lake. He didn't turn when Marlowe entered. "Did you know," Lawrence said, still facing the window, "that Eileen installed a dash cam in her car 3 months ago, after that fender bender on South Congress?" Marlowe's careful composure faltered. "I wasn't aware." "No, I don't suppose you were." Lawrence finally turned, holding a small black device. "The highway patrol recovered it from the wreckage. The footage is quite clear despite the rain." "I don't understand what this has to do with me." Lawrence pressed a button and Eileen's voice filled the room. "If you're watching this, Dad, then something's happened to me. Marlowe is having an affair with his assistant, Piper Voss. She's pregnant. I have proof, and I think they want me dead." The recording ended. Marlowe stood frozen, unable to form words. "The meeting at Metrolife tomorrow," Lawrence said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "You and Ms. Voss will be there. So will I. And so will the police." He stepped closer, his expression carved from stone. "My daughter knew what you were planning, Marlowe. She just didn't realize how soon you would make your move." As understanding dawned, Marlowe felt the floor giving way beneath him. The careful plan, the perfect crime, the future he'd mapped out with Piper, all of it collapsing in an instant. "What do you want?" he managed to ask. Lawrence's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Justice. But first, I want you to spend the next 24 hours exactly as my daughter spent her last day, knowing what was coming, but powerless to stop it." When Marlowe left Hampton Pharmaceuticals 30 minutes later, his practiced composure had abandoned him. He walked to his Porsche on shaking legs, fumbling with his keys, his mind racing through escape scenarios that all ended in failure. His phone buzzed with a text from Piper. How did it go? What does he know? Marlowe stared at the screen, unable to type a response that could possibly convey the magnitude of their disaster. As he slid into the driver's seat, his phone rang. Metrolife Insurance. He answered automatically, his lawyer's instincts taking over despite his internal panic. "Mr. Thorne," said a formal voice he didn't recognize. "This is Wendell Nash, Director of Claims at Metrolife. I'm calling to confirm our meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. regarding your late wife's policy." "Yes," Marlowe heard himself say. "My assistant and I will be there." "Excellent. Oh, and Mr. Thorne." "Mr." Hampton has requested to join us as well. As the policy's original beneficiary before your marriage, we felt it appropriate to include him. I hope that won't be a problem." Marlowe closed his eyes, seeing the trap closing around them with perfect clarity. No problem at all. As he hung up, a new text from Piper lit up his screen. "Just got a call from Metrolife confirming tomorrow. Lawrence will be there." What's going on? Marlowe started the engine, his mind suddenly clear. They had exactly 21 hours to make a decision: face Lawrence and whatever evidence he had assembled against them, or run with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a baby on the way. Either way, the life they'd planned, the one paid for with Eileen's death, was already over. The Metrolife insurance building stood like a gleaming sentinel in downtown Austin, its glass exterior reflecting the cloudless Texas sky. Marlowe gripped the steering wheel of his parked Porsche, watching as Piper approached from the public garage across the street. Her walk was stiff, her normally confident stride replaced by cautious steps. The navy blue pantsuit she wore, chosen to project professionalism, couldn't hide the slight tremor in her hands as she opened the passenger door. "Tell me exactly what Lawrence said," she demanded the moment she was inside. "You've been cryptic since yesterday." Marlowe stared straight ahead. "He has Eileen's dashcam footage. She recorded a message saying she knew about us, about the pregnancy." Piper's sharp intake of breath filled the car. "That's impossible. She couldn't have known." "Evidently she did." Marlowe finally turned to her. "We have two options. We go upstairs and bluff our way through this meeting, or we drive to the airport right now." "With what money?" "Our accounts would be frozen the minute we became fugitives." Piper's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "I won't raise our child on the run. Then we go up there and deny everything." He checked his watch, 1:47 p.m. "Follow my lead. Say only what's necessary." The elevator ride to the 14th floor was silent, tension crackling between them like static electricity. The receptionist directed them to a conference room at the end of a long hallway. Through the glass walls, Marlowe could see Lawrence Hampton already seated, along with a balding, middle-aged man he assumed was Wendell Nash. What he hadn't expected was the third person, a woman in a charcoal suit, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun, a small silver badge clipped to her belt. "Is that a cop?" Piper whispered, panic edging into her voice. "Stay calm," Marlowe murmured. "Remember, they need to prove something happened. An accident is just an accident until proven otherwise." Nash rose to greet them as they entered, his handshake perfunctory. "Mr. Thorne, Ms. Voss, thank you for coming. I believe you know Mr. Hampton, and this is Detective Raina Ortiz from Austin PD's Special Investigations Unit." Ortiz didn't stand, merely nodded, dark eyes assessing them with clinical precision. "Please sit." Marlowe chose the chair farthest from Lawrence, who hadn't acknowledged their arrival. Piper sat beside him, back rigid, hands folded in her lap. "As I mentioned on the phone," Nash began, "we're conducting our standard review of Mrs. Thorne's policy before processing the claim. Given the substantial payout and the circumstances of her death, we need to be thorough." "Of course," Marlowe replied smoothly. "I'm an attorney. I understand the process." "Then you'll understand why we've involved Detective Ortiz." Nash gestured to the officer. "The company has certain obligations when red flags appear." "Red flags?" Marlowe's expression remained neutral despite the knot forming in his stomach. "Such as?" Detective Ortiz finally spoke, her voice carrying a slight Texan drawl that didn't quite match her formal appearance. "Mr. Thorne, are you familiar with the Driscoll Hotel?" The question hung in the air like a guillotine blade. From the corner of his eye, Marlowe saw Piper's knuckles go white. "It's a historic hotel downtown," he answered carefully. "Anyone who's lived in Austin for more than a week knows it." "Indeed." Ortiz slid a manila folder across the table. "Would you mind explaining why you and Ms. Voss have checked into room 521 at the Driscoll 14 times over the past year?" Marlowe didn't reach for the folder. "I fail to see how my business meetings relate to my wife's accident." "Business meetings?" Ortiz's tone made it clear she wasn't buying it. "Is that what you call them?" Lawrence, who had been silent until now, pushed another folder forward. "My daughter wasn't a fool, Marlowe. 3 months ago, she hired Blackwell Investigations to follow you." Piper made a small, strangled sound as Lawrence opened the folder to reveal photographs. Marlowe and Piper entering the hotel elevator, his hand on the small of her back, the two of them at a secluded table in a San Antonio restaurant 2 hours from Austin, Marlowe kissing Piper in the parking garage beneath his downtown office. While infidelity is distasteful, Marlowe said, fighting to keep his voice steady. "It hardly constitutes insurance fraud." "No," Nash agreed, "but it does establish motive when combined with other factors, such as the significant increase to Mrs. Thorne's policy that you insisted upon 8 months ago, an increase that specifically added enhanced benefits for accidental death." Lawrence leaned forward, eyes boring into Marlowe. "Tell them about the calls, Marlowe. The ones Piper made to Eileen the day she died." Piper's head snapped up. "Those were about work documents, urgent filings that needed signatures." "On a Sunday?" Ortiz raised an eyebrow. 3 calls, each longer than the previous. The last one approximately 40 minutes before Mrs. Thorne's accident. Calls that were deleted from your phone, Ms. Voss, but not from Mrs. Thorne's call log." Marlowe fought the urge to silence Piper with a look. They hadn't discussed a unified story about those calls, a critical oversight. "I needed those documents first thing Monday morning," Piper insisted, her voice rising slightly. "It was for the Wilkinson case. You can check our files." Ortiz made a note without looking up. "We already have. The Wilkinson case was settled 2 weeks before those calls." The room fell silent. Marlowe could hear Piper's breathing quicken beside him. "Let me be clear," Nash interjected, folding his hands on the table. "Metrolife takes accusations of fraud extremely seriously. We have a fiduciary duty to our shareholders to investigate thoroughly before processing claims of this magnitude. And I," added Detective Ortiz, "have a duty to the people of Travis County to investigate potential criminal activity. Mr. Thorne, are you aware that your wife's Mercedes was equipped with a dash cam?" Marlowe nodded stiffly. "Lawrence mentioned it yesterday." "Then you're aware that Mrs. Thorne recorded a message on it the morning of her death." Ortiz didn't frame it as a question. "A message naming both of you and expressing fear for her safety." "That's absurd," Marlowe countered. "Eileen had no reason to fear me. Whatever she said must have been misinterpreted." Lawrence's laugh was cold and humorless. "Would you like to hear it for yourself?" Again. Before Marlowe could respond, Ortiz produced a small digital recorder and pressed play. Eileen's voice filled the room, clear despite the ambient road noise in the background. "I found proof of Marlowe's affair with Piper. The investigator delivered the final report yesterday. Dates, locations, photographs. They're not even being careful anymore. And she's pregnant. I overheard her on the phone at the office last week. I confronted Marlowe last night, but he denied everything, even when I showed him the photos. He thinks I'll just roll over, give him a divorce settlement and disappear. But Hampton women don't work that way." A pause then. "Dad, if you're listening to this, it means something's happened to me. The file is in my safe. Combination 06-2289, and check my email. I forwarded everything to myself yesterday from Marlowe's computer while he was in the shower. He's been researching accident scenarios, Dad. That curve on 290 to Fredericksburg comes up in his search history repeatedly. I'm driving out there today to see why it interests him so much. Maybe I'm being paranoid, but if I'm not, don't let him get away with it." The recording ended. Piper had gone completely pale, one hand clutching the edge of the table, the other protectively covering her stomach. "That's not... She's making assumptions," Piper stammered. "Yes, I'm pregnant, but Marlowe isn't..." "Stop talking," Marlowe cut in sharply. Detective Ortiz's focus shifted to Piper. "Ms. Voss, are you saying Mr. Thorne is not the father of your child?" Before Piper could respond, Marlowe interjected. "My client isn't answering any more questions without legal representation." "Your client?" Ortiz tilted her head. "I thought she was your assistant." "She's both, and as her attorney I'm advising her to remain silent." Lawrence's voice cut through the tension. "A bit late for that strategy, don't you think? We've already accessed Eileen's email. We know about the searches, Marlowe. Fatal car accidents that look natural. Dangerous curves in hill country. Insurance payout, contested death. Those searches could be for any number of cases I'm working on," Marlowe replied, but the excuse sounded hollow, even to his own ears. Nash cleared his throat. "Given the information presented, Metrolife is denying your claim pending further investigation. Detective Ortiz, I believe you have something to add." Ortiz stood, removing handcuffs from her belt. "Marlowe Thorne, Piper Voss, you're both under arrest for the murder of Eileen Hampton Thorne. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As the detective continued reciting their Miranda rights, Marlowe's mind raced through potential defenses, legal strategies, ways to create reasonable doubt. But the evidence was damning. The affair, the insurance policy, the targeted calls, the searches. He glanced at Piper, who stared back at him with naked fear in her eyes. In that moment, something fractured between them, the unified front giving way to individual survival instincts. "I want a deal," Piper blurted out, as Ortiz finished the Miranda warning. "I'll tell you everything. It wasn't my idea, any of it. He planned it all." Marlowe's blood ran cold. "Piper, shut up. I have texts," she continued desperately, ignoring him. "Messages where he talked about the insurance money, about how we'd be free once she was gone. I saved them all." "Ms. Voss," Ortiz said carefully, "are you saying Mr. Thorne planned to kill his wife?" "We didn't kill her." Piper's voice rose hysterically. "It really was an accident. We hoped something might happen. We talked about it, fantasized about it, but we didn't cause the accident." Lawrence Hampton rose slowly from his chair, his face a mask of controlled fury. "You hoped my daughter would die? You fantasized about it?" Marlowe knew the situation was unsalvageable. Piper's panic had doomed them both. As uniformed officers entered the conference room, he made one last attempt at damage control. "Detective, my client is clearly distraught and not thinking clearly. She's pregnant, under enormous stress, and making statements that don't reflect reality." Ortiz ignored him, focusing on Piper. "Ms. Voss, where are these texts you mentioned?" "My phone." "And backed up to my cloud account?" Piper's eyes darted to Marlowe, a mix of apology and self-preservation in her gaze. "I can give you the password." As Ortiz handcuffed him, Marlowe maintained his composure, falling back on years of courtroom experience to hide the turmoil within. Across the table, Lawrence Hampton watched the proceedings with cold satisfaction, vengeance glittering in his eyes. "One thing, Marlowe," Lawrence said as the officers prepared to lead them away. "Eileen changed her will 3 weeks ago. Even if you'd gotten away with this, you wouldn't have seen a penny beyond what was legally required. She knew what you were." In the hallway outside, curious Metro Life employees gathered to watch as Austin's most promising young attorney and his pregnant assistant were escorted to the elevator in handcuffs. The professional mask Marlowe had worn for years finally slipped, revealing the desperate man beneath. As the elevator doors closed, separating him from Piper, who was being led to a different car, Marlowe heard her voice crack. "I'm sorry, but I have to think about the baby now." The news of their arrest spread through Austin's legal and business communities like wildfire. By evening, it dominated local television with reporters stationed outside the police headquarters downtown. The headline on the Austin American-Statesman's website read, "Prominent attorney and pregnant mistress arrested in heiress death plot." In separate interrogation rooms, their stories began to diverge further. Detective Ortiz sat across from Piper, a sympathetic expression carefully constructed to encourage disclosure. "The DA is willing to consider your cooperation, Ms. Voss, especially given your condition." Piper, makeup streaked from crying, clutched a paper cup of water. "I never wanted her to die. You have to believe that." "Then tell me what happened from the beginning." "We started seeing each other 2 years ago after I joined the firm." Piper's voice steadied as she slipped into the narrative. "It was just an affair at first. Marlowe said his marriage was essentially over, that they stayed together for appearances." "And when did murder enter the conversation?" Piper flinched at the word. "It wasn't like that. Not at first. About a year ago, Marlowe mentioned Eileen's life insurance policy during pillow talk, said it was ironic that she was worth more dead than alive to him." In the adjacent room, Marlowe maintained his silence, refusing to answer questions without his attorney present. Raymond Goldstein, one of Austin's top criminal defense lawyers and Marlowe's former law school classmate, arrived within an hour of the arrest. "My client has nothing to say," Goldstein informed Ortiz when she entered. "And I'll be moving to suppress any statements Ms. Voss has made, as they clearly result from coercion of a vulnerable pregnant woman." Ortiz smiled thinly. "Good luck with that. Her statements were completely voluntary, practically couldn't stop her from talking. And we've already accessed her cloud account with her written permission." She slid her phone across the table, displaying a text conversation between Marlowe and Piper from 2 months earlier. Marlowe, "Policy is ironclad. Double indemnity for accidents. Once it's done, we'll have everything we need to start over." Piper, "I'm scared. What if someone figures it out?" Marlowe, "No one will. These things happen all the time. A curve, bad weather. a moment of distraction. All we need is opportunity. Goldstein's expression remained neutral, but Marlowe saw the slight tightening around his eyes, the look of a defense attorney who knows he's facing an uphill battle. When the interrogations ended for the night, Marlowe was led to a holding cell while arrangements were made to transfer Piper to the medical wing due to her pregnancy. As he sat on the thin mattress, staring at the cinder-block wall, he realized how completely his carefully constructed life had imploded in less than 48 hours. The following morning, as they awaited arraignment, a court officer handed Goldstein a document that made his eyebrows rise toward his hairline. "What is it?" Marlowe asked, still impeccably groomed despite his orange jumpsuit. "The DA's office expedited a search warrant for your downtown condo last night." Goldstein's tone was carefully measured. "They found a notebook in your bedside table, handwritten notes about Eileen's routine, the route she took to Fredericksburg, details about that particular curve on Highway 290. Marlowe felt the blood drain from his face. "That's impossible. I never wrote anything down." "It's in your handwriting, Marlowe." Goldstein fixed him with a hard stare. "And there's more. They found an empty bottle of Ambien prescribed to Eileen in your bathroom trash. The ME is ordering toxicology tests to see if she was drugged before the accident." "I never drugged her," Marlowe hissed. "This is a setup." "By whom?" "The only person setting you up seems to be your girlfriend." Goldstein leaned closer. "She's telling them you suggested putting Ambien in Eileen's coffee the morning of the accident to slow her reflexes. Said you told her it would be untraceable after a crash that severe." Marlowe's mind reeled. The notebook, the pills, none of it made sense. He'd been careful, meticulous. He'd never committed anything to paper, never discussed drugging Eileen. Unless... Piper, he whispered, the realization dawning with horrifying clarity. "She's framing me to save herself." In the courthouse holding area, separated by several cells, Piper sat with her court-appointed attorney, a tired-looking public defender named Sarah Chen. "The DA is offering a deal," Chen explained quietly. "Testify against Thorne. Plead to conspiracy and manslaughter instead of first-degree murder. 20 years eligible for parole in 7. Piper's hand trembled as she signed the agreement. "Will I be able to keep my baby?" "For a little while," Chen replied, her expression softening slightly. "The Texas Department of Criminal Justice has a program for mothers, but eventually you'll need a guardian, family member perhaps." Piper nodded, thinking of her sister in Dallas. "She'll take care of the baby." As Chen gathered the paperwork, Piper glanced toward the cell block where Marlowe was being held. The man she'd once believed would give her everything had given her nothing but a child she would barely know and a future behind bars. But she'd survive. She always had. At the arraignment, Marlowe and Piper were brought into the courtroom separately. He entered first, standing tall despite the shackles and prison attire. When Piper was led in minutes later, their eyes met briefly across the crowded room. Her gaze was unflinching, determined, and utterly without remorse. In that moment, Marlowe understood with perfect clarity. The game had changed. It was no longer about escaping justice together, but about who would take the greater fall. In the front row of the gallery, Lawrence Hampton watched the proceedings with the cold satisfaction of a man who had set a perfect trap. Beside him sat Detective Ortiz, her expression professionally neutral, but her eyes alert, cataloging every reaction, every glance between the accused. As the judge read the charges, first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, insurance fraud, Marlowe felt the weight of realization settling over him. There would be no $10 million, no escape to San Francisco, no fresh start, only a battle for survival against the woman carrying his child, a woman who had just revealed herself to be an even more ruthless player than he had ever imagined. 3 weeks after their arrest, Marlowe sat across from Raymond Goldstein in a cramped consultation room at the Travis County Correctional Complex. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his increasingly gaunt face. "The prosecution shared their discovery files this morning," Goldstein said, spreading documents across the metal table. "It's worse than we thought." Marlowe leaned forward, scanning the papers. "How is that possible?" "For starters, Piper's deal is official. She's flipped completely." Goldstein tapped a transcript. "Her formal statement runs 46 pages. She claims you began plotting Eileen's death nearly a year ago, shortly after discovering her pregnancy." "That's a lie," Marlowe hissed. "She told me about the baby 4 months ago." Goldstein's expression remained neutral. "She has prenatal records showing she's actually 6 months along, not 4. According to her, you insisted she hide the true timeline to maintain plausible deniability. The revelation hit Marlowe like a physical blow. He'd never questioned Piper's account of the pregnancy timeline, another critical error in judgment. There's more, Goldstein continued. The toxicology report came back. They found Ambien in Eileen's system, enough to impair her reflexes but not enough to be immediately obvious as the cause of the crash. That's impossible, I never drugged her. Someone did. Goldstein slid forward another document. The DA has Eileen's calendar. She had coffee with Piper the morning of the accident, something neither of you mentioned in your initial statements. Marlowe's mind raced, reconstructing that Sunday. Eileen had left early, mentioned something about meeting a colleague. Piper never told me she met with Eileen that day. She's telling investigators you instructed her to meet Eileen, to slip the medication into her coffee, and to suggest the vineyard trip. Goldstein's tone remained professional, but his eyes reflected concern. They found her fingerprints on Eileen's coffee mug, preserved in the dishwasher that hadn't been run. The walls of the consultation room seemed to close in around Marlowe. The case against him was no longer circumstantial. It was methodically constructed with physical evidence and a cooperative witness. Piper's setting me up, he said quietly. She's making me the mastermind while painting herself as the manipulated accomplice. That's her strategy, yes. Goldstein gathered the papers, reorganizing them with practiced efficiency. But there's something else you should know. Lawrence Hampton has hired his own forensic team to analyze Eileen's computer and phone. They found something interesting. He passed over a printout of an email thread between Eileen and a Dr. Sarah Winters, dated 3 weeks before the accident. Dr. Winters. The results confirm what we suspected. I've attached the full report, but the short version is that the specific genetic marker is present. I recommend we proceed with the additional testing we discussed. Given your family history, time is of the essence. Eileen. Thank you, Sarah. I'll make the appointment for next week. I haven't told Marlowe yet. With everything else going on, this feels like one burden too many. But I need to be certain before I make any decisions. Marlowe looked up, confusion evident. What is this? Hampton's investigators believe Eileen was ill, possibly seriously. These exchanges continue over several weeks with increasing urgency. The last one was 2 days before she died. Eileen. The second opinion confirmed it. I'm making arrangements for treatment to begin next month. I plan to tell Marlowe everything this weekend. Despite our problems, he deserves to know what we're facing. Goldstein leaned back, watching Marlowe's reaction carefully. The prosecution hasn't included this in discovery yet. Hampton shared it with me privately. I think he's trying to understand what happened as much as anyone. Marlowe stared at the emails, a cold realization forming. If Eileen was seriously ill, then her death might have had nothing to do with an accident, Goldstein finished. She might have lost consciousness at the wheel. The Ambien and her medical condition could have been a deadly combination. We need those medical records, already subpoenaed. But understand what this means, Marlowe. If Eileen was terminally ill, the prosecution could argue you knew about her condition and accelerated your timeline, that you saw her illness as an opportunity because a natural death wouldn't trigger the double indemnity clause in the insurance policy. Outside the correctional facility, the media circus surrounding the Hampton murder case had reached fever pitch. Satellite trucks lined the street, reporters delivering breathless updates on every development. Court TV announced a special series on the case, while Netflix producers reportedly reached out to Lawrence Hampton about documentary rights. The story had everything: wealth, betrayal, a pharmaceutical empire, a pregnant mistress, and the golden boy attorney whose ambition had curdled into something darker. Even the tabloids joined the frenzy, publishing decade-old photos of Marlowe and Eileen's lavish wedding alongside recent mugshots. While Marlowe remained in county lockup, Piper had been transferred to the pregnancy unit at the women's facility in Gatesville. There, during a routine ultrasound, she received news that further complicated the narrative she'd constructed. Ms. Voss, based on the fetal development, you're actually closer to 7 months along, not 6, the prison doctor informed her, moving the ultrasound wand across her swollen belly. The baby appears healthy, but your due date needs to be adjusted. Piper stared at the ceiling, absorbing this information with mounting dread. 7 months meant conception in early June. During the week Marlowe had been in Chicago for a conference, the week she'd spent with Andrew Richter, a senior associate at Thorne & Associates who'd been pursuing her for months. Her carefully crafted testimony, with its precise timeline of events, now contained a potentially devastating flaw. If the prosecution discovered the true paternity, her credibility as a witness would crumble, along with her plea deal. Alone in her cell that night, Piper weighed her options. She could maintain the fiction that Marlowe was the father and hope no one demanded a paternity test, or she could revise her statement again, risking perjury charges and the collapse of her plea agreement. As she deliberated, another player entered the game. Caroline Winters, Eileen's former assistant at Hampton Pharmaceuticals, sat across from Detective Ortiz in a downtown coffee shop, away from the media's prying eyes. "I've been organizing Mrs. Thorne's personal files," Caroline explained, sliding a thumb drive across the table. "I found something that didn't make it into the initial investigation." Ortiz pocketed the drive. "What am I looking at?" "Voice recordings." Mrs. Thorne apparently installed an app on her phone that automatically recorded all her calls. It was part of her system for keeping meeting notes. "And these recordings are relevant because there are several between her and Piper Voss that directly contradict Ms. Voss's statement to police." Caroline's voice lowered. "And one between Mrs. Thorne and her doctor that changes everything about this case." Later that evening, in her office at Austin PD, Ortiz listened to the recordings with growing concern. The first was a call between Eileen and Piper from 2 weeks before the accident. "Eileen, I know about you and Marlowe, Piper. I have for months." Piper, "Mrs. Thorne, I'm not sure what you—" Eileen, "Please don't insult my intelligence. The question isn't whether it's happening, but what we're going to do about it. I'd like to meet. Just the two of us." Piper, "Yes, of course." Eileen, "Sunday morning, 9 a.m. That coffee shop on South Lamar you and Marlowe are so fond of. I think it's time we understood each other." The second recording, from the day before Eileen's death, was between her and a physician. "Dr. Winters, the genetic test confirms Hampton's disease, Eileen. I'm so sorry. Given how it affected your mother, we need to be aggressive with treatment." Eileen, "What's my prognosis?" Dr. Winters, "Without treatment, 6 months at most. With the experimental protocol we discussed, possibly 2 to 3 years. But you need to understand, this is the same condition that took your mother. The protocol might extend your life, but there are no guarantees." Eileen, "And the symptoms? Will I lose myself the way she did?" Dr. Winters, "The cognitive decline typically accelerates in the later stages. The medication should help manage that. But yes, eventually." Eileen, "My father can't know yet. Not until I've decided what to do." Dr. Winters, "Eileen, you need support right now. Your husband—" Eileen, "Marlowe is the last person I can tell. Just promise me you'll keep this confidential for now." Ortiz sat back, the implications sinking in. Hampton's disease, a rare aggressive neurological disorder that had claimed Eileen's mother a decade earlier. Lawrence Hampton had kept his wife's condition private, shielding Eileen from the media spotlight during her mother's decline. Now it appeared the disease had resurfaced in Eileen, with the same devastating prognosis. The third recording delivered the final, stunning revelation. From the morning of the accident, a conversation between Eileen and Piper at the coffee shop. Eileen, "Thank you for meeting me, Piper." Piper, "You didn't give me much choice." Eileen, "I suppose not. I'll be direct. I know you're pregnant with Marlowe's child. I know about your plans to leave Austin after collecting my life insurance." Piper, "Mrs. Thorne, Eileen, please, let me finish. I've recently received some difficult news. I don't have much time left. Months, at best." Silence for several seconds. Piper, "I don't understand." Eileen, "I'm dying, Piper. The same disease that took my mother. By this time next year, I'll either be dead or unable to recognize my own reflection." Piper, I'm sorry." Eileen, "I don't want your sympathy. I want to make you an offer. I know Marlowe has been researching accidents, specifically that curve on Highway 290. I know you've both been waiting for an opportunity." Piper, voice shaking, "What are you saying?" Eileen, "I'm saying I'm going to give you that opportunity. Today. I'll drive out to Fredericksburg, take that curve too fast. The insurance pays out, you get your fresh start, and I avoid the long, humiliating decline my mother endured." Piper, "You can't be serious." Eileen, "I've never been more serious. But I have conditions. First, My father can never know about my diagnosis. Let him believe it was truly an accident, or even that you and Marlowe were responsible. He needs someone to blame, and I'd rather it be you than fate. Piper. Eileen, this is insane. You're talking about suicide. Eileen, I'm talking about dying on my terms. My second condition, you leave Marlowe. The man you think you know, he's not capable of the love you deserve. Take the money and start over. Just you and your child. Piper. Why would you do this for us after everything? Eileen. Not for you, not even for Marlowe. For my father, who shouldn't have to watch another woman he loves deteriorate into a shell. And for myself, because I refused to become what my mother became. The recording ended abruptly. Ortiz sat motionless, the case she'd built so carefully now collapsing under this new information. Eileen Hampton Thorne hadn't been murdered. She'd orchestrated her own death, manipulating Marlowe and Piper's plan to serve her own final purpose. The next morning, Ortiz requested an emergency meeting with District Attorney Elena Vasquez. They listened to the recordings together in Vasquez's office, the implications growing more profound with each revelation. This changes everything, Vasquez said finally. Eileen Thorne committed suicide and set up her husband and his mistress to take the fall. Not exactly, Ortiz countered. They were still conspiring to kill her. The fact that she beat them to it doesn't negate their intent, but it complicates the case significantly. Their defense will argue that Eileen's death was a voluntary act, that even if they discussed killing her, they didn't actually cause her death. There's still the Ambien, Ortiz reminded her. Someone drugged her coffee that morning, and based on this recording, it wasn't Marlowe or Piper. The realization settled over both women simultaneously. Eileen drugged herself, Vasquez whispered, to ensure she wouldn't change her mind when the moment came. Ortiz nodded slowly. She created the perfect scenario, one where the insurance would pay out because it would appear to be an accident, where her father would be spared knowing about her illness, and where the two people who betrayed her would either spend their lives in prison or live under the cloud of suspicion. We need to bring Lawrence Hampton in, Vasquez decided. He deserves to know the truth before this becomes public. But across town, Lawrence Hampton was making a discovery of his own. In Eileen's home office, the safe now opened, he found a handwritten letter addressed to him, dated the day before her death. Dad, if you're reading this, then things have happened as I intended. I know you're searching for answers, for someone to blame. By now you may have discovered what Marlowe and Piper were planning. You might even believe they succeeded. The truth is more complicated. 3 weeks ago, Doctor, Winters confirmed what I've suspected since the headaches began. Hampton's disease has found me, just as it found Mom. I have months at best before the decline begins. I couldn't bear for you to watch that happen again, nor could I accept that fate for myself. So I've made a choice. Tomorrow I'll drive to Fredericksburg. You know the road, that sharp curve where Mom always made you slow down. I won't be slowing down. Marlowe and Piper have been plotting something similar for months. I learned about their affair, about her pregnancy, about their plans for after I'm gone. Let them believe they've won. Let them face the consequences of their intentions, even if they didn't ultimately cause my death. Forgive me for this final deception. Remember me as I was, not as I would have become. All my love. Eileen Lawrence sat heavily in Eileen's desk chair, the letter trembling in his hands. The vengeance that had driven him these past weeks suddenly felt hollow. His daughter had chosen her own end, manipulating them all in her final act. As the full truth emerged, the Hampton murder case transformed yet again in the public consciousness. Journalists scrambled to reframe the narrative, while legal experts debated whether Marlowe and Piper could still be prosecuted for a murder that was, in fact, a suicide. In his cell, Marlowe received the news from Goldstein with stunned disbelief. She knew about everything. Not just knew, she used it, Goldstein replied. Eileen outplayed you all. She chose her death, implicated you and Piper, and preserved her dignity in the process. What happens now? The murder charges will likely be reduced to conspiracy. You're not off the hook. You still planned her death, researched how to make it look accidental, and stood to benefit financially. But the fact that Eileen took her own life changes the legal landscape significantly. Marlowe stared at the concrete wall, processing this final devastating twist. And Piper? Her deal? Complicated by two factors. First, this new evidence contradicts parts of her testimony. Second, Goldstein hesitated, The medical examiner determined her pregnancy is further along than she claimed. The DA is considering a paternity test to establish timeline credibility. In that moment, Marlowe understood the full measure of his destruction. Not only had he failed to orchestrate the perfect crime, but he'd been unwittingly cast in a tragedy of Eileen's design. A final, brilliant act of revenge against the husband who had betrayed her and the woman who had replaced her. The media dubbed it the Hampton Deception, a case where the victim had orchestrated her own demise while ensuring that those who wished her dead would face justice for their intentions. As Lawrence Hampton emerged from his daughter's home office that afternoon, letter in hand, he found Detective Ortiz waiting on the porch, her expression solemn. "You know?" she said simply, seeing the paper in his grip. Lawrence nodded, his face etched with grief and pride in equal measure. She was always the smartest one in the family. 6 months after the bombshell revelations about Eileen's suicide, the Travis County courthouse buzzed with activity. News vans lined the street, their satellite dishes reaching skyward like mechanical flowers. Court TV had established a semi-permanent broadcast position across from the entrance, where legal analysts dissected every development in what one cable network had dubbed the most twisted case in Texas history. Inside courtroom 4B, Raymond Goldstein adjusted Marlowe's tie moments before the jury entered. Despite months in custody, Marlowe had maintained his polished appearance. Hair perfectly trimmed, his county-issued suit tailored, as well as circumstances allowed. "Remember," Goldstein whispered, "the jury needs to see remorse, not calculation. We're not denying the conspiracy anymore. We're arguing that Eileen's choice negates the most serious charges." Marlowe nodded almost imperceptibly as the bailiff called the court to order. Across the aisle, Lawrence Hampton occupied the front row behind the prosecution, his face a mask of dignified grief. Beside him sat Detective Raina Ortiz, whose testimony would be crucial to the state's case. District Attorney Elena Vasquez approached the podium for her opening statement, her crimson suit a deliberate contrast to the somber courtroom. "This case is not about who caused Eileen Hampton Thorne's death," she began, her voice carrying to the rafters. "We know she took her own life rather than suffer the same degenerative disease that claimed her mother. This case is about intent, about conspiracy, about two people who spent months plotting a murder, a plot so transparent that the victim herself discovered it and used it in her final act of defiance." Vasquez gestured toward Marlowe. "The defendant before you today researched fatal accidents, increased his wife's life insurance policy, and conspired with his pregnant mistress to create what he thought was the perfect murder. The fact that Eileen Thorne chose to die on her own terms doesn't absolve him of his intentions or the conspiracy he orchestrated." In the women's facility at Gatesville, Piper Voss watched a delayed broadcast of the opening statements, one hand absently stroking her now empty belly. 2 weeks earlier, she had given birth to a daughter, 7 pounds 3 ounces with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to take in everything. For 48 precious hours, she had held her child in the prison's medical unit, before Celeste Voss, her older sister from Dallas, had arrived to claim temporary custody. "I'm naming her Maisie," Piper had whispered, as she placed the newborn in her sister's arms. "It means pearl, something beautiful that comes from pain." Celeste, 37 and childless after years of trying, had regarded her sister with a mixture of compassion and condemnation. "I'll take care of her until you're out." But Piper, she'll be 7 years old by then. She'll have a life, routines, school friends. You need to prepare yourself for that reality. The separation had been physically painful, like a second birth, a tearing away that left Piper hollow and aching. In the days since, she had vacillated between devastating grief and a strange new clarity. The facade she'd maintained since her arrest, that she was merely Marlowe's pawn, had crumbled under the weight of motherhood. Now, watching Marlowe at the defense table, his expression calibrated to project just the right amount of contrition, she recognized the performance for what it was. She had played the same role in her initial statements, casting herself as the manipulated assistant rather than an equal conspirator. The truth was messier. They had been partners in their plan, each bringing their own ambitions and resentments to the conspiracy. Marlowe had wanted the money and freedom from a marriage that had become a business arrangement. Piper had wanted legitimacy, security, and the lifestyle she'd glimpsed as Marlowe's mistress. And now Eileen, a woman she'd resented and pitied in equal measure, had outwitted them both from beyond the grave. Back in the courtroom, Goldstein delivered his opening statement with measured confidence. The prosecution has already acknowledged the central fact of this case. Eileen Thorne took her own life. What the state is attempting to do is prosecute my client for thoughts, for hypothetical scenarios that never came to pass. He paced before the jury box, making eye contact with each member. Yes, Mr. Thorne's marriage was troubled. Yes, he had an affair, a failing for which he bears moral responsibility. But the leap from infidelity to conspiracy to commit murder requires evidence of specific intent and concrete steps toward commission of the crime. The prosecution has only fragments of text messages, internet searches, and the testimony of a co-defendant whose statements have been demonstrably inconsistent. In the gallery, Detective Ortiz watched the defense's strategy unfold with professional detachment. Over the past 6 months, the Hampton case had consumed her career. She had traced financial records, interviewed dozens of witnesses, and assembled a timeline of events so meticulous that the FBI had requested her methodology for their training program. For Ortiz, the case had long since transcended its initial sensationalism. Beyond the tabloid elements, the wealth, the affair, the pregnancy, lay something more profound. A woman who, facing unimaginable suffering, had rewritten her ending on her own terms, ensuring that those who betrayed her would face consequences even in her absence. It was Ortiz who had discovered the full extent of Eileen's planning. Beyond the letter to her father and the recorded conversation with Piper, Eileen had left a breadcrumb trail designed to be found after her death. Emails to herself detailing Marlowe's suspicious behavior, calendar entries showing her awareness of his affair, and notes about the changes to her life insurance policy. Most damning was an audio diary found on her password-protected laptop, in which she methodically documented her discovery of Marlowe and Piper's plan, her terminal diagnosis, and her decision to take control of both situations. "I won't give them the satisfaction," Eileen's voice had declared in the final entry, recorded the night before her death. "If I'm leaving this world, it will be on my schedule, not theirs. And perhaps in the process, I can ensure they never enjoy the future they've been planning over my hypothetical grave." On the trial's third day, Lawrence Hampton took the stand. The courtroom fell silent as he settled into the witness chair, his aristocratic bearing undiminished by grief. "Mr. Hampton," Vasquez began, "when did you first become concerned about your daughter's marriage to the defendant?" Lawrence straightened infinitesimally. "From the beginning. Marlowe courted Eileen with a precision that suggested calculation rather than affection, but she was in love, or thought she was. After years of focusing solely on her career, she wanted what her friends had: a husband, the possibility of a family. And later? Did your concerns continue?" "They evolved. Eileen became increasingly isolated. Marlowe encouraged her to reduce her role at Hampton Pharmaceuticals, ostensibly so they could travel more. But they rarely did. Instead, he expanded his law practice using her connections and capital. Did Eileen ever express concerns about her marriage?" Lawrence hesitated, his composure slipping momentarily. "Not until the end. 3 months before her death, she called me late one night. She'd found receipts, text messages. She suspected an affair but had no proof. I suggested a private investigator. And did she follow that suggestion?" "Yes." The investigator confirmed her suspicions 6 weeks before her death. Photographs, hotel records, restaurant bills, all documenting Marlowe's relationship with Ms. Voss. What was Eileen's reaction to this confirmation? Lawrence's voice lowered, forcing the gallery to lean forward. "She was resigned, said she'd suspected for months, was more concerned with protecting her assets during the divorce than with saving the marriage." During cross-examination, Goldstein approached Hampton with careful deference. "Mr. Hampton, would you say your daughter was a capable, intelligent woman?" "Extremely so. She graduated top of her class at Wharton, transformed our company's public image, and managed a considerable personal investment portfolio." "And methodical? Detail-oriented?" "Meticulously so." Goldstein nodded as if Hampton had confirmed something significant. "If she suspected her husband of plotting something as serious as her murder, would it be in character for her to document that thoroughly?" "Absolutely. Yet, in her letter to you, the one she left in her safe, she mentioned only her illness and her decision to end her life on her terms. She referenced her awareness of my client's affair and suspected intentions, but provided no details or evidence of an actual murder plot. Isn't that correct? For the first time, Lawrence appeared uncertain. The letter wasn't comprehensive. She left other evidence. Circumstantial evidence, Mr. Hampton. Text messages about an insurance policy that could be interpreted multiple ways. Internet searches that could relate to my client's legal cases, but nothing that definitively proves a conspiracy to commit murder rather than, say, insurance fraud. Vasquez objected, arguing that Goldstein was testifying rather than questioning, but the point had been made. The case against Marlowe, while compelling, lacked the smoking gun that would make conviction a certainty. As the trial entered its second week, Piper's testimony loomed as the prosecution's best hope for securing that definitive evidence. Under her plea agreement, she would appear via video link from Gatesville, her sentence dependent on the substantial assistance she provided. The night before her scheduled testimony, Celeste Voss brought baby Maisie to the women's facility for a supervised visit. In a room normally reserved for attorney conferences, Piper held her daughter for the first time since the birth, marveling at how much she had changed in just a few weeks. "She has his eyes," Piper whispered, watching Maisie's unfocused gaze drift around the room. Celeste tensed visibly. "Marlowe's, you mean?" Piper didn't respond, but her expression confirmed what both sisters already knew. The child's paternity was more complicated than the official record suggested. "The prosecutor called," Celeste said carefully. "They're concerned about the timeline discrepancy in your testimony. They've requested a DNA sample from Maisie to establish paternity." Piper clutched the baby tighter. "They can't do that without consent. She's a minor. They've already petitioned the court. Given the circumstances, they'll likely get approval." Celeste hesitated. "Pipe, if Marlowe isn't the father, it doesn't matter," Piper interrupted. "He believed he was. Our plan was real. Everything else in my testimony is true." But both women recognized the lie. If DNA proved Andrew Richter fathered Maisie, Piper's carefully constructed narrative would collapse. The prosecution's star witness would be revealed as unreliable at best, deliberately deceptive at worst. Detective Ortiz recognized the same vulnerability. That evening, she sat across from D.A. Vasquez in the prosecution's war room, surrounded by case files and evidence boards. "If the paternity test comes back negative, we lose her testimony," Ortiz said bluntly. "And without Piper, our case against Marlowe weakens significantly." Vasquez rubbed her temples. "The conspiracy charge could still stick. We have the text messages, the insurance policy, the internet searches, all circumstantial. A good defense attorney, and Goldstein is one of the best, will create reasonable doubt. He'll argue that Marlowe was unhappy in his marriage, perhaps even planning to leave, but not plotting murder. What about the notebook? The handwritten notes about the Highway 290 curve?" Ortiz grimaced. "Forensics can't definitively date the ink. Goldstein will claim Marlowe wrote those notes after Eileen's accident, perhaps trying to understand what happened. So we're back to Piper's testimony, which hinges on her credibility, a pregnancy timeline being a fundamental part of her story." Vasquez stood, pacing the length of the conference table. "There's another angle we haven't fully explored. Eileen's recording from the coffee shop, the one where she tells Piper about her plan to stage her own accident. The way Piper responds makes it clear they had discussed killing Eileen previously. But we can't use that without revealing Eileen's suicide, which Goldstein would use to further undermine the murder conspiracy charge. Unless..." Vasquez stopped pacing, a new strategy forming. "Unless we reframe the narrative. We acknowledge Eileen's choice, but argue that she only made that choice because she discovered their plot. In effect, they caused her death by creating the circumstances that led to her decision. Criminal causation." Ortiz nodded slowly. "It's a stretch legally but emotionally compelling for a jury." The next morning, as Piper prepared to testify, a prison guard delivered an envelope from the DA's office. Inside was a single document, the results of Maisie's paternity test, rushed through the state lab overnight. Piper's hands trembled as she read the conclusion. Excluded as biological father. Marlowe was not Maisie's father. The genetic analysis confirmed what Piper had suspected, but refused to acknowledge. Andrew Richter, the senior associate who'd pursued her so persistently, had fathered her child during Marlowe's absence in Chicago. Her testimony, scheduled for 10 a.m., now loomed as a moment of reckoning. She could either admit the deception, potentially undermining the case against Marlowe and her own plea deal, or commit perjury by maintaining the fiction that had become central to the prosecution's timeline. Across town, unaware of the paternity results, Marlowe sat in the holding cell adjacent to the courtroom, reviewing his notes with Goldstein. "Piper testifies today," the attorney reminded him. "She'll try to make you the mastermind, herself the reluctant accomplice. We'll counter with the inconsistencies in her statements, emphasize that her deal incentivizes her to exaggerate your involvement." "And if the jury believes her?" Marlowe asked, his confidence faltering for the first time. "Then we focus on sentencing mitigation, but I don't think it'll come to that. The prosecution's case has holes and juries don't like witnesses who change their story." "What about the baby? Have they established paternity?" "Not to my knowledge." "Why? Is there some question about it?" Marlowe considered the implications before answering. "Piper and I were careful. Always. The timing never quite aligned with what she told me, but I assumed she was being cautious about establishing the timeline in case anyone suspected our relationship." Goldstein's expression sharpened. "Are you saying you might not be the father?" "I'm saying it's possible. Does it matter legally?" "It matters enormously for her credibility. If she lied about something that fundamental, her entire testimony becomes suspect." At precisely 10 a.m., and the courtroom screens flickered to life, showing Piper in a small conference room at Gatesville. She had lost the pregnancy weight, her face thinner than at the arraignment, her eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. She took the oath with a steady voice, but her hands clutched a tissue, shredding it slowly as Vasquez began her questioning. "Ms. Voss, please tell the court about your relationship with the defendant, Marlowe Thorne." Piper swallowed visibly. "We began an affair approximately 2 years ago, shortly after I joined his firm as a legal assistant. It was initially casual, then became more serious." "And when did your conversations begin to include discussions about Eileen Thorne's death?" Piper hesitated, her gaze dropping to her hands. When she looked up, her expression had changed, a subtle shift from rehearsed witness to something more authentic. "I'm afraid I can't answer that question truthfully as I've presented it previously," she said quietly. In the courtroom, a murmur rippled through the gallery. Vasquez froze, caught off guard by the deviation from expected testimony. "Ms. Voss, perhaps you could clarify what you mean," she prompted carefully. "I mean that certain elements of my previous statements were incomplete or inaccurate. In light of recent evidence, I need to correct the record." Goldstein leaned forward, suddenly alert to the unexpected opening. Marlowe tensed beside him, sensing a shift in the case's trajectory. At the prosecution table, Vasquez signaled for a sidebar. Judge Michaels granted a 15-minute recess, during which Vasquez conferred urgently with Piper via private video link. When court resumed, the tension had ratcheted higher. Piper, visibly distressed but resolute, faced the camera. "Ms. Voss," Vasquez began again, her strategy hastily recalibrated. "Let's address these inaccuracies directly. You previously testified that Marlowe Thorne is the father of your child. Is that correct?" "No," Piper replied, her voice barely audible. "He is not. I received confirmation this morning." Another ripple through the courtroom, louder this time. Judge Michaels gavelled for silence. "If Mr. Thorne is not the father, who is?" "Andrew Richter, a senior associate at Thorne & Associates." "And does this change in paternity affect the substance of your testimony regarding the conspiracy to cause Eileen Thorne's death?" Piper took a deep breath. "Not in essence, no. Marlowe and I did discuss scenarios where Eileen might die in ways that appeared accidental. We did talk about the insurance money, but what, Ms. Voss? But it was more hypothetical than I previously characterized, more fantasy than concrete plan, until Eileen confronted me that Sunday morning. In the defendant's chair, Marlowe's expression betrayed nothing, but his mind raced with implications. Piper was simultaneously undermining her credibility and softening the conspiracy narrative, a move that benefited him legally while potentially damaging the prosecution's case irreparably. What neither Marlowe nor anyone else in the courtroom realized was that Piper's apparent confession concealed another layer of deception, one orchestrated not by her, but by Lawrence Hampton, whose resources and determination extended far beyond what the prosecution or defense had anticipated. As Piper's testimony continued, seemingly unraveling the state's case against Marlowe, Hampton sat impassively in the gallery, his eyes fixed on the back of his former son-in-law's head. Beneath his public face of grieving father seeking justice lay a calculated patience, The same strategic thinking that had built Hampton Pharmaceuticals into a billion-dollar empire. Justice would come, but not in the form of a jury verdict or prison sentence. Lawrence Hampton had designed a far more fitting consequence for the man who had betrayed his daughter and the woman who had helped him do it. And the first phase of that plan had just been set in motion with Piper's testimony. As the trial entered its final week, the prosecution's case had been severely damaged by Piper's revised testimony. What had begun as a straightforward conspiracy to commit murder had devolved into a murky landscape of hypothetical discussions, marital dissatisfaction, and a terminal patient's decision to end her life on her own terms. In the Travis County District Attorney's office, Elena Vasquez paced her corner office, while Detective Ortiz reviewed their remaining evidence spread across a conference table. "We can still salvage this," Vasquez insisted, though her tone lacked conviction. "Piper may have walked back the most damning elements of her testimony, but we have the text messages, the insurance policy, the internet searches." Ortiz shook her head. "The jury's seen through Piper. Once a witness's credibility is compromised, it taints everything associated with them." She tapped a folder containing the transcripts of Piper's earlier statements. "Goldstein has methodically highlighted each inconsistency. The jury's left wondering what to believe." Vasquez stopped pacing. "Then we need something definitive, something that doesn't rely on Piper's credibility. We've been through every piece of evidence, interviewed every witness. What's left?" Before Vasquez could respond, her assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission, a breach of protocol that signaled urgency. "There's someone here to see you," the assistant said. "He says it's about the Hampton case, that he has new evidence." Ortiz straightened. "Who?" "Andrew Richter, the man Ms. Voss identified as her baby's father." Richter, a tall man with the carefully cultivated appearance of a corporate attorney, sat uncomfortably across from Vasquez and Ortiz 30 minutes later. His tailored suit and monogrammed cufflinks projected affluence, but his expression betrayed profound anxiety. "I should have come forward sooner," he began, placing a thumb drive on the desk between them. "But I was afraid. For my career, my reputation, and yes, for my safety." "Your safety?" Ortiz echoed, her investigator's instincts immediately alert. "Marlowe has connections in this town, powerful ones, and after what happened to Eileen—" He trailed off, glancing at the thumb drive as if it might detonate. Vasquez leaned forward. "Mr. Richter, what exactly are you bringing us?" "Recordings, from Marlowe's office." He swallowed visibly. "I installed the devices after overhearing a conversation between him and Piper that disturbed me. This was 4 months before Eileen's death." "You illegally recorded your employer?" Ortiz asked, her tone neutral. "Yes, I know it's inadmissible, but after you hear what's on there, maybe you can find another way to introduce the information." When they played the first recording, the quality was surprisingly clear. Marlowe's voice unmistakable as he discussed the Highway 290 curve with clinical detachment. "The guardrail ends right before the sharpest part of the turn," he explained to someone presumed to be Piper. "At 60 miles per hour, the centrifugal force would overcome the traction of even the best tires, especially in wet conditions. The car would go airborne for approximately 3 seconds before impact. Survivability at that velocity, with that drop, effectively 0. The second recording was even more damning. A detailed discussion of the insurance policy's double indemnity clause, with Marlowe explicitly calculating the payout for accidental death versus suicide or natural causes. 5 million becomes 10 million if it's ruled an accident, his voice explained. That's what makes the curve perfect. No evidence of intent, just a tragic miscalculation on a rainy night. By the fifth recording, Ortiz and Vasquez exchanged glances of stunned validation. Here was the smoking gun they'd been seeking. Explicit conversations planning Eileen's death, detailing the method, motive, and opportunity with chilling precision. "How do we get this admitted?" Ortiz asked, after Richter had been escorted out. "The recordings are clearly illegal under Texas law." Vasquez's expression had transformed from defeat to renewed determination. "We don't introduce the recordings themselves. We bring in Richter as a witness. He testifies to overhearing these conversations, making contemporaneous notes, and being so concerned that he came forward. Hearsay, with exceptions for statements against penal interest and present sense impressions. Plus, Goldstein opened the door by attacking Piper's credibility. This corroborates elements of her original testimony." The next morning, Judge Michaels heard arguments on the prosecution's motion to add Andrew Richter as a rebuttal witness. Goldstein objected vehemently, arguing surprise and prejudice to his client, but ultimately lost. The judge allowed Richter's testimony, though limiting its scope to conversations he personally overheard without reference to any recordings. In the gallery, Lawrence Hampton observed the proceedings with inscrutable calm. Beside him sat Caroline Winters, Eileen's former assistant, who had become his right hand in the months since his daughter's death. Their whispered conference went unnoticed amidst the drama unfolding at the bench. Richter's testimony electrified the courtroom. Speaking with the precise vocabulary of a seasoned attorney, he detailed conversations between Marlowe and Piper that left little doubt about their intentions. He described Marlowe diagramming the Highway 290 curve on a legal pad, calculating stopping distances, researching weather patterns to identify optimal conditions for an accident. Under Goldstein's aggressive cross-examination, Richter remained unflappable, acknowledging his own moral failings in not reporting these conversations sooner and in pursuing a relationship with Piper despite knowing she was involved with his boss. Yet you expect this jury to believe that you're coming forward now out of a sudden attack of conscience? Goldstein pressed, his skepticism evident. No, Richter replied with unexpected candor. I'm coming forward because I recently learned I have a daughter who deserves to know the truth about her mother and the man who plotted to kill his wife. The impact on the jury was visible. Several members glanced toward Marlowe, their expressions hardening as Richter's testimony reinforced the prosecution's narrative of calculated conspiracy. During the lunch recess, Goldstein confronted Marlowe in the attorney conference room, his professional composure cracking for the first time. Did you know about these conversations Richter claims to have overheard? Were they real? Marlowe's expression remained carefully neutral. Some of them, perhaps, but exaggerated, taken out of context. Hypothetical scenarios, not concrete plans. That distinction won't matter to the jury, Goldstein snapped. They're hearing a fellow attorney testify that you mapped out Eileen's death with the precision of a military operation. Can we discredit him? His relationship with Piper makes his testimony more credible, not less. He's admitting to an affair, acknowledging paternity, implicating himself in failing to report a crime. It reads as honest self-incrimination, which juries respect. Marlowe's confident facade finally showed cracks. What are our options? Limited, Goldstein admitted. I've prepared you to testify, but putting you on the stand now would be disastrous. The prosecution would eviscerate you with Richter's testimony. So we rest without a defense case? Let the jury decide based on what they've heard? Not quite. I've requested character witnesses, former clients, colleagues who can speak to your professional ethics. It's thin, but it's something. Goldstein gathered his notes. The real strategy now is damage control. We focus on reasonable doubt in closing, emphasize that Eileen took her own life, argue that talk isn't action. Marlowe nodded, but his mind was already calculating beyond the verdict. If convicted, what were his options for appeal? How much of his hidden assets could remain protected? Would the legal community ever accept him back, even after serving his sentence? As Goldstein outlined their limited defensive strategy, Marlowe found himself thinking of Eileen, not with resentment but with a grudging admiration. Even in death, she had outmaneuvered him at every turn. Across town at Gatesville, Piper watched a news summary of Richter's testimony on the prison's common room television. Her complexion ashen. Her sister Celeste had visited the previous day, bringing Maisie, who now smiled and cooed in ways that made their separation even more agonizing. The plea deal that had seemed like salvation months earlier now hung by a thread. Her inconsistent testimony, coupled with the paternity revelation, had severely damaged her credibility with the prosecution. If Marlowe was convicted, would they honor the agreement that had promised her eventual reunion with her daughter? As closing arguments approached, the courtroom swelled beyond capacity. The judge allowed overflow seating with video feeds in adjacent rooms, while court TV broadcast live to a national audience captivated by the case's salacious elements and stunning twists. Vasquez delivered a masterful closing, weaving together the physical evidence, text messages, and testimony into a tapestry of premeditation and callous intent. Eileen Hampton Thorne discovered she was dying, she told the jury, her voice resonating through the hushed courtroom. Her cruel genetic disease had marked her for the same fate that claimed her mother. Facing this devastating diagnosis, she made a choice to end her life on her terms before the disease could rob her of dignity and awareness. Vasquez paused, allowing the gravity of this reality to settle over the jury. But that choice wasn't made in a vacuum. It came after she discovered that her husband, the man who had vowed to stand by her in sickness and in health, was plotting her death with his pregnant mistress. Imagine that moment of clarity. Imagine learning that the people closest to you were calculating the physics of your fatal accident, researching the insurance payout, planning their future over your grave. She approached the jury box, making eye contact with individual jurors. The defense will tell you that because Eileen took her own life, no murder occurred. Technically, that's true. But make no mistake, the defendant's actions directly precipitated her death. His conspiracy, his betrayal, his meticulous planning forced her hand. Eileen Hampton Thorne died on October 24th because Marlo Thorne and Piper Voss left her no dignified alternative. Goldstein's closing argued passionately for reasonable doubt, emphasizing the lack of physical evidence connecting Marlo to any actual attempt on Eileen's life. Words are not actions, he reminded the jury. Hypothetical discussions, even distasteful ones, are not crimes in themselves. My client's marriage was troubled. He made morally reprehensible choices in his personal life. But the leap from marital discord to murder conspiracy requires proof beyond reasonable doubt, proof the state has failed to provide. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury returned. As the foreman rose, Marlo stared straight ahead, his attorney's hand resting lightly on his shoulder. On the charge of conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, we find the defendant, Marlo Thorne, guilty. The courtroom erupted. Lawrence Hampton closed his eyes briefly, his expression revealing neither triumph nor satisfaction, merely grim acknowledgement. Judge Michaels imposed a sentence of 25 years, with possibility of parole after 15. The court cannot ignore the calculated nature of this conspiracy, she declared, nor the profound breach of trust it represented. Mr. Thorne, you plotted the death of a woman who was already facing a terminal diagnosis, perhaps the most extreme betrayal imaginable. As deputies led Marlo away, his composed exterior finally crumbled. The mask of confident attorney gave way to the face of a man confronting decades of incarceration, his career destroyed, his reputation shattered, his freedom forfeit until middle age had given way to the first shadows of old age. In the days following the verdict, Piper's plea agreement underwent renegotiation. Her inconsistent testimony and the paternity revelation had compromised her value as a witness, but the prosecution acknowledged her eventual cooperation. Her sentence was adjusted to 15 years, with possibility of parole after 7, still a lifetime in her daughter's development, but better than the alternative. When Celeste brought Maisie for their final visit before Piper's transfer to state prison, the reality of their separation overwhelmed her carefully maintained composure. "She won't remember me," Piper sobbed, clutching the infant who stared at her with uncomprehending eyes. "By the time I'm released, she'll be in elementary school. I'll be a stranger to her." Celeste, who had maintained emotional distance throughout the proceedings, softened unexpectedly. "I'll show her your pictures. Tell her about her mother. Make sure she knows you're coming back to her." "And Andrew? Will he be part of her life?" Celeste hesitated. "He's filed for visitation rights. The court is reviewing his petition given the circumstances." What Celeste didn't share was a recent development. Andrew Richter had approached her with an unexpected proposition. He wanted to establish a trust fund for Maisie, ensuring her financial security regardless of his personal involvement. The source of this sudden generosity remained unspecified, but Celeste suspected Lawrence Hampton's influence. Indeed, 2 days after Marlo's sentencing, Lawrence had summoned Richter to his office at Hampton Pharmaceuticals. The meeting was brief, their conversation unrecorded, but its implications would reshape the futures of everyone connected to the case. "You performed admirably on the witness stand," Lawrence acknowledged, studying Richter across the expanse of his mahogany desk. "Your testimony was crucial to securing justice for my daughter." Richter shifted uncomfortably. "I only told the truth." "Indeed." Lawrence's tone suggested he knew otherwise. "Convenient timing, though. Your sudden attack of conscience coinciding perfectly with the prosecution's most vulnerable moment." "Mr. Hampton, I'm not sure what you're implying." I'm not implying anything, I'm stating facts. Lawrence slid a folder across the desk. Your relationship with Piper began well after she was involved with Marlowe. The recordings you provided, which I know about despite the prosecution's discretion, were created much more recently than you claimed. Sophisticated audio engineering, but detectable to the right experts. Richter's complexion paled. That's accurate, Lawrence finished for him. Don't insult us both by denying it. The question isn't whether you perjured yourself, but why you agreed to do so. After a long silence, Richter spoke barely above a whisper. I have a daughter now. Yes, you do. A daughter who deserves security, education, opportunities, things that become much easier to provide with proper resources. Lawrence reclaimed the folder. Your testimony served justice, Mr. Richter, even if your methods were creative. Marlowe Thorne did exactly what you described, even if you weren't personally witness to it. What happens now? Lawrence stood, signaling the meeting's conclusion. Now you focus on being a father to Maisie. A generous trust fund will be established for her education and well-being. Your law practice will thrive through a fortuitous connection with Hampton Pharmaceuticals' legal department. In exchange, you'll maintain absolute discretion about our arrangement and ensure Maisie knows something of her mother beyond prison visitation rooms. As Richter departed, Caroline Winters entered with a tablet displaying financial transfers. It's done, she reported. The last pieces are in place. Lawrence nodded, moving to the window overlooking downtown Austin. And Thorne's hidden accounts? Identified and frozen as you instructed. The offshore assets in the Caymans, the shell company in Delaware, the cryptocurrency. All of it. Good. Transfer everything to the foundation. Poetic justice, I think, that the money he accumulated during his marriage to Eileen will now fund research into Hampton's disease. Caroline hesitated. There's something else. Marlowe's requested an appeal, claiming insufficient counsel and newly discovered evidence. Lawrence turned, a cold smile forming. Let him try. Every judge in Travis County has connections to Hampton Pharmaceuticals, donations to their campaigns, spouses on our boards, children in schools we endow. He'll discover that justice in Texas has always been a matter of influence as much as law. And Piper will serve her time, knowing her daughter is cared for. A more merciful outcome than she deserves, perhaps. But Eileen would have wanted that kindness for the child's sake. What neither Lawrence nor anyone else realized was that Eileen's master plan extended even further than they had imagined. In her safe deposit box, accessed only after specific triggers in her will, lay a final letter, one addressed not to her father or the authorities, but to Marlowe himself, timed for delivery exactly 1 year after his incarceration began. As his plan for justice beyond justice unfolded, Lawrence gazed across the Austin skyline, the setting sun casting long shadows across the city where his daughter had lived and died. The trial had provided legal closure, but his personal reckoning with Eileen's loss had only begun. In her final letter, found among her effects, she had written words that now guided his every action. Justice without mercy is merely vengeance, Dad, but mercy without justice dishonors the truth. Find the balance I never could. In the sterile visitation room at the Huntsville Penitentiary, Marlowe sat across from Raymond Goldstein, now functioning solely as his appellate counsel. Gone was the bespoke suit, replaced by prison whites. His once perfect hair had been shorn to regulation length, his manicured hands now calloused from mandatory labor. The appeal isn't going well, Goldstein admitted, sorting through motion responses. Judge Herrera denied our request for a new trial based on Richter's testimony. The Fifth Circuit declined expedited review. Hampton, Marlowe muttered, the name emerging as both explanation and curse. His reach is longer than I anticipated. There's more, Goldstein continued reluctantly. Your remaining assets, the ones you thought were secure, they've been frozen pending civil litigation. Lawrence Hampton has filed wrongful death suits against both you and Piper. Marlowe's careful composure finally shattered. He can't. Double jeopardy doesn't apply to civil proceedings. O.J. Simpson learned that lesson. As the full magnitude of his situation crystallized, Marlowe realized that his downfall had been orchestrated with a strategic brilliance that surpassed even his most careful planning. Not only had he lost his freedom, but his hidden wealth, his future prospects, and any hope of rebuilding a life after release. Lawrence Hampton had ensured that justice would extend far beyond the courtroom verdict. a comprehensive destruction executed with the same meticulous attention to detail that Marlowe had once applied to planning Eileen's accident. The perfect symmetry was not lost on him. For the first time since his arrest, Marlowe Thorne lowered his head and wept. The August heat pressed down on Austin like a weighted blanket, the temperature climbing past 100 degrees for the 14th consecutive day. In his corner office atop the Hampton Pharmaceuticals building, Lawrence Hampton gazed out over the shimmering cityscape, the climate control keeping him comfortably isolated from the punishing reality outside. 6 months had passed since Marlowe Thorne's conviction. The media frenzy had gradually subsided, the satellite trucks and breathless reporters moving on to fresher tragedies. What remained was the methodical implementation of justice, not as delivered by the courts, but as orchestrated by a father who had lost his only child. "The final paperwork for the Maisie Voss Trust has been prepared," Caroline Winters said, placing a leather portfolio on his desk. "The structure is exactly as you specified." Lawrence turned from the window, his silver hair catching the afternoon light. At 66, grief had aged him in subtle ways, deeper lines around his eyes, a slight stoop to his shoulders that hadn't been there before Eileen's death. Yet his mind remained razor-sharp, his purpose unwavering. "And the conditions?" he asked, opening the portfolio. "All in place. The trust provides for Maisie's complete education, private school through college and graduate school if she chooses, medical expenses, housing allowance during her studies, even a modest car when she turns 16. Caroline hesitated. "But as you requested, the principal remains inaccessible until her 30th birthday, with one exception. If she works for the foundation for a minimum of 5 years, Lawrence finished, scanning the document with practiced efficiency. The Eileen Hampton Foundation had been established 3 months earlier, dedicated to 2 missions: research into Hampton's disease and support for families affected by its devastating progression. A third, unwritten purpose existed as well, ensuring that Eileen's legacy would touch the life of the child who, through no fault of her own, had become entangled in her story. "Is Andrew Richter aware of these terms?" Lawrence asked. "He knows the trust exists and provides for Maisie's education. The specific condition regarding the foundation hasn't been disclosed to him or Celeste Voss." Lawrence nodded, signing the documents with a heavy platinum pen that had been a gift from Eileen on his 60th birthday. "Let's keep it that way. When Maisie's old enough to understand, I'll explain it to her myself." The irony wasn't lost on him, establishing a connection with the child of the woman who had conspired in his daughter's death. But Lawrence had come to view Maisie as innocent collateral damage, a life derailed before it had properly begun. Perhaps more significantly, she represented the only living link to Eileen's story that might extend into the future. Across town, in the visiting area of the Gatesville Women's Correctional Facility, Piper Voss sat across from her sister Celeste, who bounced 8-month-old Maisie on her knee. The baby had grown dramatically since birth, her dark hair forming wispy curls, her eyes, still the enigmatic blue-gray common to many infants, showing hints of their eventual color. "She rolled over by herself yesterday," Celeste reported, her tone deliberately light. "And she's trying to sit up, gets about halfway there before toppling over." Piper absorbed these details hungrily, storing them away like precious artifacts. Her once fashionable appearance had given way to prison practicality, hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, face bare of makeup, prison uniform hanging loosely on her frame. "Is she sleeping through the night?" she asked, trying to maintain the facade of casual conversation while fighting the urge to reach across the table and snatch her daughter into her arms, an action prohibited by visitation rules. "Most nights. She has her fussy periods, usually around 2 a.m. Celeste adjusted Maisie on her lap. "Andrew visited last weekend, brought her a stuffed elephant that plays lullabies." Piper's expression tightened at the mention of Richter. His testimony had been instrumental in Marlowe's conviction, yet his sudden involvement in Maisie's life, facilitated by DNA confirmation and court-approved visitation rights, remained a source of complicated emotions. "How often is he seeing her?" "Saturdays, usually. Sometimes he takes her overnight, but..." Celeste hesitated. It's still new for both of them. He's trying. What Celeste didn't mention was Richter's increasingly comfortable financial situation, the partner track position at a prestigious firm connected to Hampton Pharmaceuticals, the new house in an exclusive West Austin neighborhood, the nanny he'd hired to help when Maisie stayed with him. all developments that had materialized with suspicious convenience after his testimony. "There's something else," Celeste said, lowering her voice though the nearest guard stood well out of earshot. "I received paperwork about a trust fund established for Maisie. It's substantial. Private school, college, graduate school if she wants it." Piper's eyes widened. "Andrew did that?" "The documents came from Hampton Pharmaceuticals' legal department." Celeste met her sister's gaze meaningfully. "Lawrence Hampton is listed as the settler. The revelation hung between them, its implications unspoken. Why would the father of the woman Piper had conspired against provide for her child? Before Piper could formulate a response, Maisie began fussing, her small face scrunching in preparation for a full-blown wail. Celeste stood automatically, bouncing the baby with practiced rhythm. "I should take her outside," she said apologetically. "It's almost nap time, and when she gets like this—" Piper nodded, swallowing her disappointment. These visits, limited to twice monthly, 1 hour each, were never long enough, always ended too abruptly. She watched as Celeste gathered Maisie's diaper bag, the baby now crying in earnest. "Next time will be better," Celeste promised, an assurance she offered at the conclusion of every difficult visit. "She's just overtired." As they turned to leave, Piper called out, "Wait!" The desperation in her voice caused both Celeste and the supervising guard to freeze. Piper stood careful to maintain the required distance. Would they let me hold her just for a minute? It's been weeks and Her voice cracked, the practiced composure she maintained for her sister's benefit crumbling. The guard, a woman in her 50s who had witnessed this scene play out with countless other incarcerated mothers, glanced at her watch, then gave a small nod. 1 minute, Voss. No more. The moment Maisie settled into her arms, something shifted in Piper's chest. A physical ache that had been constant since their separation briefly subsided. She inhaled the baby's scent, felt the solid warmth of her tiny body, marveled at how much heavier she'd become since their last contact. "Mommy loves you," she whispered, conscious of the seconds ticking away. So much. More than anything. Maisie's cries softened as she registered the familiar voice, her tiny fingers grasping Piper's collar. For an infinitesimal moment, mother and daughter existed in perfect communion, the prison walls and circumstances of their separation temporarily suspended. Then the guard's voice. "Time's up." As Celeste reclaimed the baby, Piper felt the severance physically, an amputation repeated at every visit, no less painful for its familiarity. She maintained her smile until they disappeared through the security door, then allowed herself to crumble, the sobs she'd suppressed finally breaking free. In her lowest moments, during the endless nights in her cell, Piper questioned whether her plea deal had been worth it. 15 years with possibility of parole after 7 meant Maisie would be nearly 8 when she might return to her life. A fully formed person with experiences, relationships, and memories that wouldn't include her mother. What sustained her was a single, fierce determination to become someone her daughter wouldn't be ashamed to claim when that day arrived. 30 miles away in the maximum security wing of the Huntsville Penitentiary, Marlowe Thorne sat in the prison library, legal texts spread before him. His appeal process continued, though increasingly as a formality rather than a realistic path to freedom. 3 separate appellate courts had denied his motions, each rejection more definitive than the last. Prison had transformed him physically. The meticulously maintained physique had yielded to a gauntness born of institutional food and limited exercise. His once perfect hair had grayed prematurely at the temples, and a thin scar traced his jawline, a souvenir from his 2nd month of incarceration, when he'd learned the hard way that his courtroom eloquence carried no currency in the prison hierarchy. Yet the most profound changes were internal. The confidence that had once defined him had curdled into a bitter paranoia. He saw Lawrence Hampton's influence everywhere, in the judges who denied his appeals, the guards who accidentally lost his mail, the mysterious delays in his commissary orders. His latest obsession was Eileen's revised will, a document that had emerged during the civil proceedings initiated by Lawrence. The will, updated 3 weeks before her death, had systematically dismantled the financial security Marlowe had assumed would be his upon her death. Where the original document had left him the Lake Travis vacation home, substantial investment accounts, and her personal holdings in Hampton Pharmaceuticals, the revision reduced his inheritance to the legal minimum required by Texas marital property laws. The bulk of her estate was divided between medical research foundations, arts organizations she had supported during life, and a substantial scholarship fund for women pursuing careers in pharmaceutical research. Most galling was the personal letter attached to the will addressed to him. "Marlowe, if you're reading this, I'm gone, though perhaps not in the manner you planned. I want you to know that I discovered your affair with Piper months ago. I also found your research into accident scenarios and the changes you made to my life insurance policy. I won't pretend I wasn't hurt, not by the infidelity itself, which I suspected for some time, but by the calculated betrayal it represented. You didn't just fall in love with someone else. You plotted my removal as if I were an inconvenient clause in a contract. What you couldn't have known was that I received my own death sentence in the form of a medical diagnosis. Hampton's disease, the same condition that claimed my mother, had begun its insidious progression. In a cruel irony, your timeline and mine coincided. I've revised my will to ensure that my death, whenever and however it occurs, serves purposes I value. You'll receive enough to live comfortably but not luxuriously, approximately what you would have earned as a mid-level associate at a respectable firm, which is what you were before our marriage. I don't hate you, Marlowe. I simply see you clearly now. A man who mistook ambition for character and calculation for intelligence. Perhaps in my absence, you'll discover something genuine within yourself worth developing. Eileen." The letter had arrived exactly 1 year into his sentence, delivered by the prison chaplain with no explanation of its delayed appearance. Marlowe had read it 7 times in succession, each reading revealing new layers of his ex-wife's perspicacity and his own transparent machinations. Now, as he mechanically turned pages of legal precedent he knew would offer no salvation, the truth he had avoided for 18 months finally crystallized. There would be no early release, no successful appeal, no redemption arc. His life as Marlowe Thorne, rising star of the Austin legal community, was irrevocably over. What remained was the hollow shell of a man who had gambled everything on a perfect crime and lost to a victim who had orchestrated her own death with more strategic brilliance than he had managed in his entire career. In a modest office at Austin Police Headquarters, Detective Raina Ortiz cleared the final items from her desk. After 15 years with the department, she had accepted a position with the Texas Rangers Special Crimes Unit, a promotion directly resulting from her work on the Hampton case. Her meticulous investigation had become a case study at the State Police Academy, notable for its complex intersection of suicide, conspiracy, and delayed justice. Though the legal outcome, Marlowe's conviction and Piper's plea agreement, provided formal closure, Ortiz found herself still contemplating the case's deeper implications. "Getting sentimental about the old desk?" asked Sergeant Mike Garza, leaning against the doorframe. Ortiz smiled, placing a framed commendation in her cardboard box. "Just thinking about Hampton. Never had a case quite like it. Not sure anyone has. That was some John Grisham-level stuff." She nodded, though the comparison felt inadequate. Fiction rarely captured the messy contradictions of real human behavior, the way Eileen's final act had been simultaneously an escape from suffering and a precisely calibrated revenge. How Piper's maternal instinct had ultimately overpowered her ambition. How Marlowe's intelligence had been defeated by his fundamental misreading of everyone around him. "I spoke with Lawrence Hampton yesterday," she said, closing a desk drawer. "He invited me to the Foundation's opening next month." The man certainly landed on his feet. Stock price doubled since the trial, didn't it? Something like that. What Ortiz didn't mention was the subtle transformation she'd observed in Lawrence over the months since his daughter's death. The ruthless businessman had gradually given way to something more nuanced, still formidable, still calculating, but with a newfound dimension that seemed to transcend mere corporate ambition. Their final meeting had taken place in his office, where he'd presented her with a contribution to the Police Benevolent Fund in recognition of her work. "You found justice for Eileen," he'd said, "even though the story wasn't what any of us initially believed." "Justice is rarely straightforward," she'd responded, "especially in cases like this one." Lawrence had studied her with that penetrating gaze that had intimidated pharmaceutical executives for decades. "Detective Ortiz, do you believe in justice beyond the courtroom?" The question had hung between them, loaded with implications neither acknowledged explicitly. Ortiz, with 15 years of law enforcement experience, knew that legal outcomes and moral justice often occupied separate territories. She also suspected Lawrence Hampton operated in the considerable grey area between them. "I believe everyone finds their own version of justice eventually," she had answered carefully. His slight nod suggested this was precisely the response he'd anticipated. Now packing the last of her belongings, Ortiz reflected on that conversation and its unspoken subtext. Her investigation had officially concluded with Marlowe's conviction, but Lawrence Hampton's pursuit of justice continued along paths invisible to the public eye. At Hampton Pharmaceuticals, that pursuit had manifested in a comprehensive reorganization. The company had pivoted dramatically, directing unprecedented resources toward research into Hampton's disease and related neurological disorders. The Eileen Hampton Research Initiative had recruited top scientists from around the world, funded by $1 billion commitment announced at the shareholders' meeting. "My daughter's life was shortened by this disease," Lawrence had declared from the podium. "I cannot reclaim those lost years, but I can ensure that other families don't face the same loss." Unmentioned in this public narrative was his private knowledge that Eileen had chosen death over the disease's progression, a truth he kept secluded in his heart, sharing it only with Caroline Winters during rare, unguarded moments. The Foundation's headquarters occupied the top 3 floors of a new building adjacent to the main Hampton campus. Its modern glass exterior reflected the Texas sky, while the interior featured a 2-story atrium dominated by a portrait of Eileen, not the formal corporate image used in press releases, but a candid photograph taken during a family vacation in Maine, her expression conveying genuine joy as she stood on a rocky shore, hair tousled by Atlantic winds. Beneath the portrait, a simple plaque bore her favorite quote from Marie Curie: "Nothing in life is to be feared, it is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more, so that we may fear less." The Foundation's opening ceremony drew Austin's elite: politicians, philanthropists, medical researchers, and media personalities. Lawrence delivered a brief, powerful address that carefully navigated the public narrative of Eileen's tragic accident, while emphasizing her commitment to medical research and education. What few attendees realized was that the Foundation represented merely one facet of Lawrence's comprehensive response to his daughter's death. The public veneer of philanthropy and medical progress obscured a parallel agenda executed with the same strategic precision that had built his business empire. That agenda included the systematic dismantling of everything Marlowe Thorne had valued. Beyond the criminal conviction and civil judgments, Lawrence had methodically erased Marlowe's professional legacy. The law firm Marlowe had founded was acquired by a Hampton subsidiary, renamed, and eventually absorbed into a larger practice. The legal treatise he had co-authored was quietly withdrawn from publication. His alma mater returned his donations and removed his name from the moot court competition he had endowed. Most devastating was the social excommunication engineered with subtle efficiency. Hampton's extensive influence ensured that upon Marlowe's eventual release, decades in the future, he would find no welcome in any community where he had once belonged. No law firm would risk association with him. No social circle would acknowledge him. No financial institution would service his accounts beyond the bare minimum required by law. It was a comprehensive erasure, not of Marlowe's existence, but of everything that had given that existence meaning and status. Toward Piper, Lawrence's approach proved more complex. Her betrayal of Eileen had been equally deliberate, yet she was also Maisie's mother, a connection that complicated his response. The trust fund established for Maisie represented a gesture not of forgiveness, but of recognition that the child deserved opportunities unburdened by her parents' crimes. The conditions attached to the trust, specifically the requirement that Maisie work for the Foundation to access the principal, served dual purposes. It ensured she would understand Eileen's legacy and the disease that had shaped her final choices. More subtly, it created a framework for Lawrence to eventually know his granddaughter, though he never used that term explicitly, even in private. As summer gave way to fall, Lawrence settled into a routine that balanced his corporate responsibilities with increasing involvement in the Foundation. 3 days each week, he worked from an office adjacent to the research facilities, making himself available to the scientists and physicians developing experimental treatments for Hampton's disease. During one such afternoon, Caroline entered with a manila envelope bearing the seal of the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. "It's from Huntsville," she said simply, placing it on his desk. Lawrence recognized the handwriting immediately, the precise, controlled script he had last seen on Christmas cards and birthday greetings addressed to Eileen. Marlowe's penmanship, like everything about him, projected careful competence. He opened the envelope methodically, withdrawn its contents without expression. The letter was brief, written on standard prison stationery. Mr. Hampton, I received Eileen's letter on the anniversary of my incarceration. I assume the timing of its delivery was your doing, another demonstration of your comprehensive control over the consequences I now face. I won't insult your intelligence with protestations of innocence or remorse. We both know the truth of what I intended, regardless of how events ultimately unfolded. I write instead with a simple request. The investigators who examined my case have determined that Andrew Richter perjured himself during his testimony. The conversations he claimed to have overheard could not have occurred as he described, given documented evidence of my whereabouts on the dates in question. I do not seek exoneration based on this information. What I seek is understanding. Richter's sudden appearance as a witness, his specific and detailed testimony, the convenient timing all suggest orchestration beyond the capabilities of the district attorney's office. Did you arrange his testimony? Did you ensure my conviction regardless of the technical constraints of evidence and procedure? I ask not to develop grounds for appeal, but simply to know the full dimensions of my defeat. Marlowe Thorne Lawrence read the letter twice, then placed it carefully in his desk drawer rather than responding immediately. Marlowe's assessment was accurate. Richter's testimony had indeed been carefully cultivated, the recordings engineered to provide a template for his statements without themselves being admissible. It was the one element of the case that departed from strict legal procedure, though the underlying truth it conveyed remained accurate. Later that evening, in his penthouse overlooking Ladybird Lake, Lawrence composed his response on personal stationery. Thorne, your assessment is correct in its essentials, though incomplete in its scope. Mr. Richter's testimony was shaped to ensure admissibility of information that might otherwise have remained outside the court's consideration. The content of that testimony, however, was fundamentally truthful. You did plan Eileen's death in the manner he described, if not precisely at the times he specified. Justice operates on multiple levels. The legal system provides one framework, with its rules of evidence and procedural constraints. But there are older forms of justice that recognize no such limitations. The justice of consequence, of accounting, of balance restored. You gambled with my daughter's life in pursuit of wealth you hadn't earned. That gamble has resulted in the complete dismantling of everything you valued: your freedom, your reputation, your professional legacy, and your future prospects. This is not vengeance, but symmetry. Eileen chose her death to avoid the suffering that claimed her mother. In doing so, she demonstrated more courage and clarity than you managed in your entire calculated existence. Her final act of agency denied you the future you had planned while ensuring you would face judgment for your intentions. I merely ensured that judgment would be comprehensive rather than merely procedural. Lawrence Hampton. He signed the letter with the same pen Eileen had given him, sealed it personally rather than delegating the task to Caroline, and arranged for its delivery through channels that would ensure it reached Marlowe directly rather than being intercepted by prison administrators, sympathetic to Hampton's influence. It would be the only direct communication between them, a single acknowledgement of the chess game that had concluded with Marlowe's total defeat. 3 days later, Lawrence visited the Foundation's research wing, where Dr. Sarah Winters, the physician who had diagnosed Eileen's condition, now led a team developing a revolutionary approach to treating Hampton's disease. The experimental protocol, which combined gene therapy with targeted neurological interventions, showed promising results in preliminary trials. "We're making real progress," Dr. Winters reported as they toured the laboratory. "The genetic markers you and Eileen share have helped us identify potential intervention points before symptoms manifest." Lawrence paused, processing this information. "My markers?" "Yes. The familial pattern is clear. You're a carrier. Though your particular genetic makeup has prevented symptom development, Eileen inherited a more active expression of the gene. And this new protocol, it could have helped her." Dr. Winters hesitated. "If we'd had it then, possibly. The disease might still have progressed, but much more slowly. She might have had years, even decades of normal function." The revelation settled over Lawrence like a physical weight. Eileen had chosen death over a deterioration she believed inevitable, unaware that research already underway might have altered her prognosis significantly. That night, alone in his penthouse, Lawrence experienced the first cracks in the veneer of control he'd maintained since her death. The grief he'd channeled into systematic justice suddenly overwhelmed the carefully constructed frameworks of revenge and legacy building. For the first time, he wept openly, not just for Eileen's death, but for the possibility that it might have been postponed, perhaps even prevented, had circumstances aligned differently. In this moment of vulnerability, Lawrence confronted the uncomfortable possibility that his crusade against Marlowe and Piper, while justified by their intentions, had become a substitute for processing his loss. The foundation, the trust for Maisie, the systematic dismantling of Marlowe's existence, all served both justice and his need to impose meaning on a tragedy that ultimately defied rational response. As dawn broke over Austin, Lawrence made a decision. The machinery of consequence he had set in motion for Marlowe would continue unaltered. A fate earned through calculated betrayal, but his approach to Piper and, by extension, to Maisie would evolve to incorporate something beyond mere justice. Later that week, he instructed his attorneys to modify the terms of Maisie's trust. The requirement to work for the foundation remained, but additional provisions were added: support for regular visits to Piper during her incarceration, resources for Piper's education while in prison, and a structured reintegration program upon her eventual release. These adjustments reflected not forgiveness, but recognition of a more complex truth, that Maisie's well-being depended on her mother's rehabilitation, and that Eileen, who had faced her mortality with courage and clarity, might have valued redemption alongside justice. As winter descended on Austin, bringing rare snowflakes that dusted the Hampton Pharmaceuticals campus, Lawrence stood at his office window, contemplating the legacy taking shape around him. The Foundation's research promised breakthrough treatments for the disease that had claimed Eileen. Maisie, though still an infant, had a future secured against the worst consequences of her parents' actions. Marlowe remained confined at Huntsville, his appeals exhausted, his existence reduced to the minimum parameters of prison life. Justice had been served, though in forms more complex and nuanced than the legal system alone could provide. Yet Lawrence found himself increasingly preoccupied, not with retribution completed, but with possibilities unrealized. The years Eileen might have lived with proper treatment, the relationship he might have developed with her children had she married differently, the scientific discoveries she might have overseen had she followed him into the family business. Caroline found him in this contemplative state, a manila folder in hand. "The quarterly report from Celeste Voss arrived," she said, placing it on his desk. "Maisie's development is progressing normally. She's starting to walk, saying a few words." Lawrence nodded, accepting the folder without immediately opening it. "And Piper? How are her courses progressing?" "She's completed the first semester of the paralegal program you arranged. Perfect grades according to the prison administrator. They say she's focused, disciplined. Good. Ensure the educational trust continues as planned." Caroline hesitated, then asked the question that had lingered unspoken between them for months. "May I ask why? After everything she did?" Lawrence turned from the window, his expression softening slightly. "Because Eileen understood something I'm only beginning to grasp, that justice without the possibility of redemption becomes merely an exercise in power." He gestured toward the foundation building visible across the campus. "Everything we're doing, the research, Maisie's trust, even ensuring Marlowe faces the full consequences of his actions, it's not about punishment alone. It's about balance, about ensuring that something meaningful emerges from tragedy." As Caroline departed, Lawrence opened the folder to find photographs of Maisie, standing unsteadily beside a Christmas tree, laughing in Celeste's arms, examining a toy with intense concentration. In her features, he could detect hints of Piper, but nothing of Marlowe or the Hampton lineage. Yet she represented something significant, a future shaped by but not defined by the events surrounding Eileen's death. In this child, unrelated by blood but connected by circumstance, Lawrence recognized the possibility of legacy beyond vengeance, of justice tempered by opportunity for renewal. He placed the photographs in his desk drawer alongside Eileen's last letter to him and the draft plans for the Foundation's next phase of development. Together, these items represented the complex aftermath of tragedy, part retribution, part commemoration, part creation of something new from the ashes of what was lost. Outside his window, the rare Texas snow continued to fall, transforming the familiar landscape into something both recognizable and altered, a fitting metaphor for the world Eileen had left behind, now reconfigured by her absence and the consequences that radiated from her final choice. 18 years later, the University of Texas commencement ceremony stretched across the sprawling main mall, with the iconic tower standing sentinel over the sea of black gowns and mortarboards. Among the graduates, 25-year-old Maisie Voss adjusted her honors stole, its weight symbolizing more than academic achievement. "They'd be photographing you at every turn today," Celeste whispered, squeezing her niece's hand. At 55, she had become more sister than aunt to Maisie, her once auburn hair now streaked with silver. "Who?" Maisie asked, though she knew the answer. "The media." If Lawrence hadn't been so thorough with those non-disclosure agreements. Lawrence Hampton's name rarely arose in their conversations without invoking complex emotions. He had been a shadow presence throughout Maisie's life, the architect of her educational opportunities, the guardian of her privacy, and the man who had ensured she would never suffer financially for her parents' notoriety. 18 years had transformed the Hampton case from sensational headline to Netflix documentary to half-remembered scandal. Yet in Austin legal and business circles, the story remained legendary. The pharmaceutical heiress who orchestrated her own death, the ambitious attorney who plotted to kill her, and the pregnant mistress caught between them. For Maisie, it had been the unwanted backdrop to her existence, a narrative she had spent years trying to outrun through academic excellence and carefully cultivated anonymity. With her doctoral dissertation in pharmaceutical biochemistry nearly complete, she stood on the precipice of a future defined by her own choices rather than her parents' infamy. As the ceremony concluded, she scanned the audience, finding what she sought in the VIP section. Lawrence Hampton, now 84, his once imposing frame diminished by age, but his gaze still penetrating beneath silver brows. Beside him sat Caroline Winters, who had transitioned from executive assistant to Hampton Pharmaceuticals CEO over the decades, executing Lawrence's vision as his health gradually declined. Their presence represented the culmination of a careful relationship that had evolved over years of precisely calibrated interactions. Lawrence had never attempted to replace Maisie's parents or claim familial connection, instead positioning himself as a mentor and benefactor interested in her development. Only at 17, when Maisie had accessed the complete terms of her trust, did she fully comprehend the intricate web Lawrence had woven around her life. The trust's most significant provision, requiring 5 years' service at the Eileen Hampton Foundation to access the principal, had initially felt like an imposition. Now, with her doctorate nearly complete, she recognized it as an opportunity carefully disguised as an obligation. After the ceremony, Lawrence approached her at the reception, leaning heavily on a cane of polished walnut. "Congratulations, Dr. Voss," he said, his voice thinner than in his prime, but still commanding. "Your research proposal for the foundation is exceptional." "Thank you." Maisie accepted his brief formal embrace, the most demonstrative gesture he typically allowed himself. "Though I haven't technically earned the title until I defend my dissertation next month." "A formality," he dismissed with the confidence of someone whose predictions rarely proved incorrect. "The treatment protocol you've developed has already drawn attention from the NIH. They've requested a full presentation." What remained unspoken between them was the significance of her research focus, a novel approach to treating Hampton's disease that built upon the Foundation's 18 years of groundbreaking work. The disease that had claimed her quasi-grandmother's life might finally yield to intervention, largely through the efforts of the woman whose existence was inextricably linked to that tragedy. Later that evening, after the celebrations concluded, Maisie drove to a modest apartment complex in East Austin. The building, unremarkable except for its proximity to a halfway house, represented another chapter in the story Lawrence had orchestrated with such precision. Piper Voss opened the door before her daughter could knock, as if she'd been watching through the window. At 54, her once vibrant beauty had weathered into something more austere, her auburn hair now streaked with grey, her green eyes carrying the unmistakable shadows of institutional life. "I watched the live stream," she said, embracing Maisie with the careful deference of someone still uncertain of her welcome. "You looked so beautiful up there." Inside the apartment, paid for through a subsidiary of the Hampton Foundation as part of Piper's reintegration program. Photographs of Maisie's childhood decorated the walls. School portraits, dance recitals, science fair ribbons, moments Piper had experienced secondhand through monthly prison visits, and Celeste's meticulous documentation. 7 years had passed since her release, the full 15-year sentence reduced through good behavior and educational credits. Their relationship had evolved from the awkward, supervised interactions of Maisie's childhood to something resembling normalcy, though shadows of the past lingered in unspoken thoughts and careful conversational detours. "I have news," Piper said, serving coffee in mugs bearing the UT logo, a gift from Maisie upon her acceptance to the doctoral program. "The paralegal agency offered me a permanent position. No more contract work." "That's wonderful, Mom." Maisie used the term deliberately, having noticed how Piper still brightened at hearing it, a small affirmation that their connection had survived the separation intact. What remained unspoken was the invisible hand that had guided this development, as it had so many others. Lawrence Hampton's influence, exercised through layers of intermediaries, had ensured Piper found employment appropriate to her qualifications, but circumscribed by her history. Not punishment precisely, but limitation, a lifelong reminder of consequences that extended beyond her incarceration. "Have you heard anything about—" Piper let the question trail off, as she did whenever the subject of Marlowe arose. "No," Maisie answered simply. Marlowe Thorne remained at Huntsville, his appeals exhausted, his earliest possible parole still years away. Maisie had never visited him, never written, never acknowledged his existence beyond necessary legal documentation. Her birth certificate listed Andrew Richter as her father, a technicality confirmed by DNA testing during the trial that had fundamentally altered the timeline of the conspiracy. Richter himself had maintained the carefully calibrated involvement Lawrence's arrangements required, financial support, occasional birthdays and holidays, but never attempting to establish deeper connection. His career had prospered through Hampton connections, his silence compensated through opportunities that might otherwise have remained inaccessible. The conversation shifted to safer topics: Maisie's dissertation defense, Piper's new colleagues, Celeste's upcoming retirement. Yet beneath the pleasant exchange lay the unspoken reality that had shaped their lives. Every aspect of their existence had been carefully orchestrated by Lawrence Hampton, his influence extending far beyond conventional justice into the realm of designed consequence. The following morning, Maisie drove to the Hampton estate in the hills west of Austin, a sprawling property where she had occasionally spent holidays and special occasions throughout her life. Today's visit had been requested by Lawrence himself, an unusual departure from their typically structured interactions. She found him in the conservatory, surrounded by orchids that Caroline maintained with meticulous care. Age had finally claimed his imposing stature, leaving a thinner, more fragile version of the business titan who had reshaped Austin's pharmaceutical landscape. "Thank you for coming," he said, gesturing to the chair opposite his. "There are matters we should discuss before you begin your work at the Foundation." On the table between them lay a leather portfolio bearing the Hampton Pharmaceuticals logo, similar to dozens she had seen throughout her life, though this one appeared older, the leather cracked with age. "I've always been direct with you," Lawrence began, though perhaps not completely forthcoming about certain aspects of your history. Maisie tensed. Their relationship had been built on careful boundaries. He had never attempted to replace her parents or shield her from the reality of their actions, but neither had he volunteered information beyond what seemed appropriate to her age and understanding. "What you may not fully comprehend is the extent to which your life, your opportunities, your privacy, even your educational focus, has been shaped by decisions I made before you were born. I'm aware of your influence," she acknowledged. "The trust, the foundation position, Mum's reintegration program," Lawrence smiled faintly. "Those are merely the visible elements. There is a more fundamental truth you should understand before assuming your role at the Foundation." He opened the portfolio, removing a handwritten letter on paper yellowed with age. "This was the final communication I received from Eileen, drafted the day before her death. She left instructions that it should be delivered to me only after certain conditions were met." He passed the letter to Maisie, who accepted it with historian's care. The handwriting was precise, educated, similar in style to Lawrence's own correspondence. Dad, if you're reading this, then everything has unfolded as I anticipated. Marlowe's conspiracy has been exposed. Justice has been served through conventional channels. But knowing you as I do, I suspect you've implemented your own form of justice beyond the courtroom. I understand that impulse. I've acted on it myself in orchestrating my death to ensure they face consequences for their intentions. But I ask you to consider something beyond retribution. The child Piper carries, whoever its father may be, deserves a future unburdened by its parents' crimes. I ask that you extend to this innocent life the care and opportunity you provided me. More importantly, I ask that you channel your formidable will toward fighting the disease that has claimed me. Hampton's disease needn't be my only legacy. Through the resources and influence you command, genuine good might emerge from this tragedy. Find balance, Dad, between justice and mercy, between remembering and creating anew. With love always, Eileen Maisie looked up, finding Lawrence's gaze fixed on her with unusual intensity. Everything, he said quietly, everything I've done since receiving that letter, the foundation, your trust, even the consequences Marlowe continues to face, has been in service of that balance Eileen requested. Why show me this now? Because you're about to assume a significant role at the Foundation, directing research that may finally defeat the disease that claimed her. You should understand that your position isn't merely due to your qualifications, impressive though they are. Lawrence removed another document from the portfolio, older, its official seal partially degraded by time. Before her death, Eileen made provisions for her frozen embryos, preserved years earlier when Hampton's disease was first suspected in our family line. She specified that if the appropriate ethical and medical considerations could be addressed, these embryos might one day contribute to research into the disease. Maisie's breath caught as understanding dawned. Are you saying... No, Lawrence answered quickly. Not what you're thinking. You are biologically Piper and Andrew Richter's daughter, but your educational path, your research focus, your eventual position at the Foundation, all were designed to place you in proximity to the work Eileen hoped might eventually be done. He gestured to the Foundation's headquarters, visible through the conservatory windows. Next month, when you assume your research directorship, you'll gain access to Eileen's preserved genetic material. Combined with your innovative treatment approach, it may finally provide the breakthrough we've sought for 2 decades. Maisie sat back, absorbing the implications of what Lawrence had shared. Her entire career trajectory, from her undergraduate focus to her doctoral research, had been subtly guided toward this specific purpose. Were there others? She asked finally. Other children you supported this way? Lawrence shook his head. Only you, something in the conjunction of circumstances, Piper's complicity, your biological distance from the Hampton line, the timing of your birth so close to Eileen's death. It created a unique opportunity, one I believe Eileen would have approved. After a silence weighted with decades of unspoken history, he continued, I've recently received a terminal diagnosis, the same heart condition that claimed my father. I've perhaps 6 months, according to specialists. I'm sorry, Maisie said, the words inadequate but sincere. Don't be. I've lived to see Hampton Pharmaceuticals become a global leader in neurological research. I've watched you grow into a scientist whose work may transform understanding of genetic disease. And I've fulfilled my daughter's final request, finding that balance between justice and creation. He closed the portfolio with careful precision. When I'm gone, Caroline will manage the corporate aspects of Hampton, but the Foundation will be entirely yours to direct. Eileen's remaining embryos, her genetic material, her medical records, all will be at your disposal for research purposes. And my mother, what happens to her arrangements? They continue unchanged. The apartment, her employment, the structured support system, all remain in place for her lifetime. And Marlowe? Lawrence's expression hardened slightly. Also unchanged. Some consequences must endure without mitigation. 2 months later, as summer heat shimmered across the Austin skyline, Maisie stood in her new office at the Eileen Hampton Foundation, unpacking books and research materials. Through the glass walls, she could see the laboratory where her team was already implementing the first phase of her treatment protocol. On her desk sat a photograph she had only recently discovered, Eileen at roughly Maisie's age standing in a laboratory, not unlike the one visible through the window. The physical resemblance between them was non-existent, yet Maisie felt a connection transcending biology. 2 women separated by decades, But united by scientific purpose and the complex legacy of tragedy, her phone chimed with a text from Piper. "Dinner tonight? Made your favorite." Maisie smiled, typing a quick affirmative response. Their relationship had strengthened since her graduation, evolving towards something resembling normal mother-daughter interaction, though shadows of the past occasionally surfaced in unguarded moments. As she arranged her reference materials, her assistant knocked softly. "Dr. Voss, there's a package for you. Courier just delivered it." The package bore no return address, merely her name in precise handwriting. Inside she found a single item, a platinum pen with her initials engraved along the barrel. Accompanying it was a brief note written in a shaky hand that nonetheless conveyed determination. "Maisie, by the time you receive this, I will have departed. My condition progressed more rapidly than anticipated. This pen was a gift from Eileen on my 60th birthday. I've carried it every day since her death, using it to sign the documents that shaped both justice and opportunity in her absence. It seems fitting that it should pass to you as you assume leadership of her most meaningful legacy, not the wealth or influence of Hampton Pharmaceuticals, but the foundation that bears her name and carries forward her hope that something valuable might emerge from tragedy. You were never a pawn in my pursuit of justice, though circumstances placed you at the nexus of consequential events. You were and remain the embodiment of that balance Eileen sought, between remembering what was lost and creating what might yet be. Use this pen to write the next chapter. Make it one of discovery rather than retribution." With respect and confidence, Lawrence Hampton Maisie sat at her desk, turning the pen in her fingers, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. Outside her window, the Foundation's research wing pulsed with activity. Scientists and technicians pursuing the breakthrough that had eluded them for 2 decades. On her computer screen, genetic sequences from Eileen's preserved samples aligned with experimental treatment protocols, revealing patterns that might finally unlock Hampton's disease's resistance to intervention. Her own research had already identified promising pathways, approaches that hadn't been possible when Eileen received her diagnosis. The irony wasn't lost on her that her existence, born of betrayal and conspiracy, might ultimately fulfill Eileen's hope that something meaningful would emerge from her death, that the child of the woman who had conspired against her might deliver the breakthrough that would have saved her life. As Maisie clipped Lawrence's pen to the lab coat bearing her name and the Foundation's emblem, she recognized that she stood at the intersection of multiple legacies: Piper's determination, Lawrence's strategic vision, and Eileen's final transformative choice to create opportunity from tragedy. The cycle of betrayal that had begun with Marlowe's ambition and Piper's complicity had, through Lawrence's careful orchestration and the passage of time, transformed into something neither justice nor vengeance could fully describe, a form of redemption that acknowledged the past while refusing to be defined by it. Maisie activated her computer's research interface, Hampton's pen poised above her notebook as she prepared to document the day's observations. The next chapter was indeed hers to write, not merely in the scientific journals that would chronicle her work, but in the ongoing narrative of lives shaped by choices made decades before her birth. Outside her window, Austin continued its relentless growth. The skyline transformed from what Eileen had known. Within the Foundation's walls, the legacy of a woman who had faced death on her own terms continued to evolve through the work of a daughter born from the conspiracy against her. Justice, revenge, redemption, all had found expression in this unlikely convergence of lives and purposes. But as Maisie initiated the day's research protocols, what predominated was simpler and more profound. The possibility that from the darkest human impulses might emerge, eventually, something that healed rather than harmed. And in that possibility lay the most fitting tribute to Eileen Hampton. Not the punishment of those who had betrayed her, but the creation of something neither they nor she could have imagined from the tragedy they had set in motion. If this story touched your heart, and you want to keep following inspiring and moving stories, be sure to check out our upcoming videos, subscribe to our channel, and turn on notifications to stay updated on new content that can brighten your journey and provide valuable insights. Join us and keep exploring stories that truly matter. I'm sure the next video that pops up on your screen will touch you as well, so click on it now and we'll see you there.